afternoon, everyone. I think we should get underway. My apologies to our presenters for putting you on hold for 10 minutes, and you'll have to give us a couple more minutes as we get underway, but thank you for your patience on that. I'm just going to welcome everybody here today before I turn it over to Trustee Gannett, who actually chairs this committee meeting. But I do want to welcome everybody who is with us today, but also anybody who may be watching this online, and also to our folks that are on the screen. I know that Ava Beggs, one of our student trustees, is with us online as well. So welcome to the meeting today. I would like to start with our territorial acknowledgement. And first of all, we acknowledge that the land on which our school and district buildings are situated is the traditional, unceded, and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin people. We also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nation, Métis, and Inuit peoples on the land on which we gather here today. Before I turn it over to Trustee Gannett, I also just want to quickly acknowledge that Meredith Jamieson has now joined us. Meredith is just around the table here, and I know it's other trustees didn't have a chance to meet with her, but Meredith is the new executive officer for public relations, and she will be the liaison. Public affairs. Sorry, public affairs. Apologies. She will be the liaison for trustees. So if you have any questions, you know who to call. So we appreciate and welcome you, Meredith. Yes.
Probably the wrong time to do it. Normally the other business board meeting. I had 30 seconds.
Certainly.
Yeah, I just want to, some of you probably know, but it's really the old timers around that would go, oh yeah, remember the name. Former director of this board, Don Reichley, he passed away about a week or so ago, and he was very late 80s or so in the area, and the director for 4 years, late 1980s.
Thank you, Trustee Morris. I appreciate you bringing that to our attention today. I wasn't aware. Thank you very much. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Trustee Gannett, who is the chair of the Program and Student Achievement Committee. So
thank you,
the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Humphreys. Good afternoon. Mike Gannett, trustee with our board. I'm in charge of the Program and Student Achievement Committee. And good afternoon, all. And are there any amendments to the agenda that you have received? None noted. I'm asking for a motion to approve the agenda. Seconded by Leo Boland. All in favor? Thank you. Are there any conflicts of interest based on the current agenda? None noted. We'll begin with our first presentation. And our first presentation is the Annual Action Plan, School Effectiveness and Student Success. And just want to basically state the purpose of it, that is to provide the Board of Trustees with an overview of system-wide efforts at the elementary school level in support of student achievement, as well as excellence in teaching learning over the course of the 22-23 school year. I'd like to turn it over to SO Jenny Smith to introduce the staff that are going to be presenting today.
Sure. Happy to do that. And I'll introduce very quickly and turn things over to Shelley Gagne, who is the lead. And just letting you know that this portion that we're talking about today is the elementary portion of this action plan that we'll be sharing with you today. And our hope is, you've had the report and you've had the action plan for your review. So you've been able to look at that and sort of see some of the big picture items. So the group today is going to walk you through some examples and help you to see what some of that work is looking like planned for this school year, and help to bring a picture to it and make it alive for you so you can have an understanding of what that looks like. You'll probably be thinking, as we were kind of going through things, and we're thinking, how does this group do this much? When you start to lay out all the things that they have taken on and all of their commitments, and it's because of their commitment to this work and commitment to our district and how they're able to take the direction of the ministry, but also understand where we are at as a district and know the stories of our schools and our educators and be able to continue to move us forward. So I will turn things over to Shelley, who can introduce the rest of the team and get started.
Thank you. Thank you for having us this afternoon. And we couldn't do this work without this phenomenal team. We only have about half of us from the program services department here, but they're excited to share the work that they've been doing in literacy and numeracy. So they're mixed amongst each other, literacy and numeracy. We have Jen Rowe, Jordan Sloan, Nancy Neville, Colette Mantipel, Jody Rakoski, and Lori Mason. And so they are instrumental in providing PD and supporting our educators in our schools and just doing some amazing work this year. When we sat down, like Jenny had said, when I sat down and actually put things into the action plan, I used to start looking at all of the work that's happening because you're so busy in the day-to-day events that when you're, there is quite a bit going on. So without me speaking a whole lot, they have the floor. And we're going to start with numeracy. So Jen's going to start, and she is going to share a little bit about the divisional goals that are set.
Great. So hello and welcome back and happy new year. And this new 2022-23 school year has been full of so much promise at our elementary level. It feels after many years of pivoting and adapting and adjusting to various challenges that we, as educators, we were ready to embrace what's been missing over the past few years. And I'm pleased to be here with my team to give you an overview of what our CDSB educators have been engaged with in terms of professional learning, our collective sense of responsibility for the development and achievement of our core skills in numeracy. So as you can see here, our target goals for each division build on each other, all supported with research-based pedagogy, including the high-impact instructional practices from our mathematics curriculum, along with the principles of universal design for learning. And that's to support the strengths and abilities of all students in our classrooms. I wasn't really going to read them because I figured you'd be reading it well. Okay, so our story here begins with empowering the educator. We know that the implementation of effective practices will produce greater gains in student achievement. We also know that the collective teacher efficacy is correlated to student achievement. It's important that we need to ask ourselves not only what works, but what works best. And as educators across RCDSB, we have been doing that, just that. We have brought classroom teachers, ECEs, special education teachers together to develop our practices, to learn and relearn about some new and some tried and true resources, to create learning communities with each other, all within the lens of developing and refining our practices to increase student achievement. This year, we had over 80 primary educators respond to committing more time learning about early numeracy continuums and how to accurately identify where students are along their learning paths. We've had most educators in grades 4 to 8 together in small groupings to initially learn about the newly purchased Math Up resource by Dr. Marion Small, and since then individual meetings across all our schools. In doing so, we've been learning about identifying and making math meaningful to our students through the big ideas in our curriculum. We have PLC groupings working with Dr. Nikki Newton after school and webinars, learning how to accurately use math running records to identify and support the development of basic math facts. And we have professional learning groups refining their practices around Peter Liljedahl's Building Thinking Classrooms, as well as those involved with our High Five project. As we network, collaborate, share our learning, and develop our own content knowledge and practices, we are empowering ourselves as educators to support our student achievement in math. And now, Jody and Colette will share the details of how this has taken a role in the classrooms with educators and their students.
So now the educators have had their professional development. The next step is gathering the data that allows us to meet students where they're at and build the foundational skills and concepts to support their learning throughout the divisions. One of the ways that we've gathered some of the data this year was through a common assessment where students created a video of their thinking. We're going to try and show you a little sample if it works.
I picked number 57 and I 4, which got me 200. Then I times 7 by 4, which was 28. So that's how I got 228.
We're next down the bottom right corner.
So this is just one way, along with observational checklists and one-to-one interviews, which we use with math running records or the loss in assessments. And they're all ways that we can use our observations and conversations to triangulate the data that students are giving us. These all identify specific strategies students use and what next steps would help them become more fluid and flexible when working with numbers. Our High Five project is one that focuses specifically on helping students who struggle with math to be successful and comfortable by using best practices and removing barriers which support not only them, but all the students in the class. And we're using math running records with our High Five classes to identify students' go-to strategies, and then using that to help them build on that by providing repeated practice and opportunities for, to use more efficient strategies.
Have to stop sharing and try again. Great, just be patient. That's strange. Okay, so once we've done the assessments and we know where our students are at, the question becomes, how do we move them forward? And the ministry's document of high impact instructional practices discusses a lot of the best practices that teachers can use in their classrooms. And some of those include small groups, flexible groupings, problem solving, and math conversations. And there are many resources that teachers can use, that educators can use to allow them to implement these practices into their classroom. Two of the resources that our board has promoted is Marion Small's Math Up program and the Mathletics program. As Jen has already mentioned, all teachers from grades 4 to 9 have been given the opportunity to be trained on the Math Up program. And we've had a lot of positive feedback about this program from both new and experienced teachers. Not only does the program offer lessons and units and assessments for the Ontario curriculum, but it also provides opportunities for rich conversations through number talks and problem solving. This program also allows teachers to meet their students where they are at, as all educators have access to kindergarten to grade 8. So they have access to all those different grades and all those different lessons. Another program that students have access to is the Mathletics program. Now, this is a student-driven program. So it's a digital math program which allows for deliberate practice. And when teachers assign this deliberate practice, when students are able to work independently at their desks, it frees teachers up and it allows them to work in small groups with students and meet them where they are at. The goal for all of these practices, best practices, is to be implemented through UDL, or Universal Design for Learning. That is about removing barriers so that all students can be successful. And it's about creating a classroom environment where students feel confident and comfortable in taking risks and attempting tasks.
So once all these foundations have been created and put in place, educators now have the tools to identify where the students are and how they're going to move them forward. We want to have a plan in place to monitor and keep track of the progress they're making. And so quantifying our data is done in a variety of ways to provide opportunities for students to demonstrate their learning through observations, conversations, and products. The pie graph there shows that this fall, most junior students were using additive thinking or breaking down numbers when solving multiplication problems. The math running record and student dispositions are also other ways that we are collecting data with the goal of meeting students where they are and moving them forward. After collecting this data, we then had the opportunity to meet with all the junior teachers throughout the board and talk to them about the strategies their students were using and make plans or activities they could use in their classroom to help move the students along to more effective strategies.
So engaging for family participation. So we know that students have a better chance of being successful when there's a positive relationship between the school and home. And thanks to technology, there are many ways that educators can reach out to parents and guardians so that they can support their child. And one of the ways is through Google Classroom. Educators can post assignments, activities, and games in the classroom, and families can access this while they are at home. And MathUp has made this very easy for teachers, as in the program, they're able to just click a button, copy a link, and paste the activities or games into the Google Classroom. And Marion Small has also created materials for parents and guardians that gives examples and explains some of the math content so that they are aware of what their students are learning. Our math team has also just started creating a series of videos showcasing some games that parents can play at home to encourage their children to use more effective strategies when they are working with numbers. And the nice thing, these are Lawson games, and the nice thing about these games is that the materials that are needed are easily accessible at home. It might be a deck of cards, it might be a couple dice. So it's nice that families can interact with their students for that.
And our wonder, I'm sorry, I'm going to interject. Our wonderful coaches have, I promised I wouldn't show it. But you may have access to the slide, so please feel free to go back and take a look when you have a minute. But they, during the Christmas, just before the Christmas break, they modeled a game, videotaped themselves, gave the instructions, and invited families to try it over the holidays or whenever they can. But anyhow, so it's embedded in there for you to look at.
You want a little joke or
Oh, no. Okay, so and if we do our jobs well and we are inspired educators through our content knowledge and the implementation of best practice, we will create spaces in our classrooms where our students are not simply just the learners of math, but the doers of math. This article that I have linked in this slide, I have a quote here: having students build their identity as doers of mathematics starts with providing opportunities to access voice and employ agency in math classrooms. Student voice in class does not just mean hearing from a student. It means they have the opportunity to share their thinking, to challenge the thinking of others. It means they have the opportunity to work together while engaging in math. So they are constructing meaning, not just taking in information. And we feel this last video is a great example from a classroom here in RCDSB that accurately shows just that. Learning mixed with laughter in a space where students can be critical and creative thinkers, a space where students know they belong and their learning matters. So that's video. Okay, so thank you. That's the numeracy portion.
And you can see there, like, you know, there's students have the flexibility to get up and move around the room, but they were all on task. You could hear the math language happening. And so it's giving the students that flexibility to demonstrate their learning in different ways. Okay, so we'll flip to our literacy side, and
Okay.
Lori's going to start.
Yes. So similar to what our numeracy coach counterpart said, a lot of the work that's happening sort of begins in primary, but builds on itself as our students develop those skills, those foundational skills, become more confident with those foundational skills, and begin to apply them independently to the tasks that they're working on at in the classrooms in order to become confident, competent, literate humans in our world in both languages, English and French, as they move through the divisions in our board. So we've listed some of our very general big ideas as from our perspective and our work with the teachers, the educators, and how we hope that it impacts the students in our board.
So at the secondary division in French, our goal is always to work on that language proficiency and move eventually towards the DELF. So this year we were able to implement with our grade 9 students Point de Connexion and with our grade 10 to 12 Jusqu'au Bout, which are digital resources. We had some DELF preparation sessions and resources and a day with our FSL secondary educators. And we are having some upcoming ACP PD on read alouds in secondary.
And I know we said this was elementary, but just so you know that our literacy coaches are K to 12, so they support the French in high school as well.
Okay, so we're sort of starting top down with our intermediate educators and classrooms. We're continuing our focus from last year with the work of Penny Kittle and Kelly Gallagher and creating engaging literacy interactions for our students by providing various reading and writing activities and tasks that really allow the students to bring their own voice to the classroom and to their discussions and learn alongside each other, as well as from potentially other groups as well. And with a focus also on writing, which you'll see continue in our junior grades. So we do have some resources that we have been encouraging with those groups. And we'll talk a little bit more about the writing revolution and what the writing looks like in the junior section.
In French and intermediate, we're working a lot on the same strategies with our teachers and with our students in terms of the writing. But we're also working on a mini DELF with our intermediate students where they are able to take some sample DELF tests and get a feel for the exam, what it looks like, what their level of proficiency is like at that point. So as they go into the secondary level, they've got some information as they choose what courses they're going to take.
And as Jordan mentioned, a lot of the work that we're doing in literacy is based around strategies. So they aren't language specific, but rather best practices for supporting language development and best practices for teaching and learning that can be applied in both languages, both teaching situations. So a lot of the slides are very similar. So in junior, not only are we sort of focusing on continuing the work that we'll talk about in primary as we try to ensure that all of our students are working on developing a very strong understanding and a strong base in those foundational literacy skills, but we're also digging into a focus on writing. And typically that sort of comes later in our development of literacy, where we need all of those oral language reading skills to be solid in order to be able to apply them to our written communication. So in the junior classrooms, we have a focus on writing with the writing revolution and the writing rope. And they are mostly just ideals, philosophies that really help to break down the pieces that, the pieces and the skills that we need to be strong writers, and presents them to students in a strategic way and allows for a lot of targeted feedback so that educators can be really specific in supporting student growth and learning.
And again, those same strategies transferring over to our FSL programs as well. This year, we were also able to implement and are working to implement a core French program called EcoPro with our junior students and teachers. Just working on those authentic tasks, working on the language proficiency, lining up with all 4 strands of our FSL curriculum.
So our primary division, this is where we have a lot of work happening in response to the right to read, the Ontario Human Rights Commission's right to read from last February, as well as the new ministry document from April 2022. So this is where a lot of work is going in right now. And as I said, continuing into junior to make sure that all of our students are able to consolidate that learning and have a good foundation. So as per the Human Rights Commission recommendation, we selected a screener in the fall that we could use to screen our SK to grade 2 students. So every student in the board was screened using this research-based, evidence-based screener, and the lists will speak more to that when they do their presentation. but we have screened every student and then been able to look at that data and find ways that the lists can support, as well as us as instructional coaches go in and support teachers in making some adjustments, shifts in practice that are more evidence-based perhaps, and have proven to be a bit more effective with students who might be flagged by the evidence-based screener, such as Acadians. With that information and those practices, we are continuing to work on phonological awareness and developing that phonemic awareness in our young learners and as well into junior. Haggerty being our main resource that we're encouraging in our classrooms, and it's a very thorough resource that can support educators as they're learning about these skills and the different types of skills that build them and are important for our students to be flexible. The same as we want them to be flexible with numbers, we would like them to be flexible with the sounds that build the languages that we're learning and how that works to help us as we read and write and communicate in that way with others. We also have a shift to an explicit focus on phonics in our classrooms. This is somewhat new, as our curriculum has been very focused on the comprehension aspect of a competent learner, a reader. So phonics is an explicit phonics approach is new to a lot of our educators. So we have been doing lots of learning and discussions around structured literacy, which is has all the components of phonics and phonological awareness, fluency, vocabulary building, comprehension, oral language, all of those great skills that we are aware of, but maybe sort of explains it, ensures that the educator understands the importance that those skills have for our students, as well as how they work together to create a well-rounded literate student. So UFly is developed in the States, but it is a foundations manual focused on comprehensive phonics from K to 2. So we have gotten these manuals. We have begun some conversations with educators, but we will be starting our formal RCDSB training next week. And we are very excited to see how that rolls out. And the lists are also using this resource as part of their intervention and have begun those conversations in schools as well. So everybody seems, there's a little bit of a buzz right now about it, and we're very excited to get started and see how it goes and what the data will show us at the end when we go back to do that second part of the Acadians data as per the Right to Read recommendation, and how those shifts and how that learning has impacted our students in the classrooms.
And we are addressing all of these same components with our students in FSL in a slightly different way, because the resources are still being developed in English as well as being developed in French. We are addressing the phonological and phonemic awareness in French through a program that was purchased through our CDSB called Pratique Phonemique. So dealing with all of those same components in the same way that Haggerty does with our students in English. For phonics, we are working with bilingual chalk and sock programs, and we are working with our teachers with Michel Minal-Corriveau and José Leboutillier through our partnership with ACPI to do some professional learning around those best practices in literacy development in primary. And we are working with our teachers on professional development. So we have ongoing language proficiency sessions where our teachers are able to get language coaching one-on-one or in small groups. We continue to work with ACPI on our partnership, and we sent a few teachers to the conference this past November, which was held in Ottawa. All of our teachers have access to ACPI's Zone Pédagogique, which provides resources and lots of learning. We are continuing to build our diversifying FSL lending library that is accessible to all teachers in our board. And we were able to sort of upgrade the training for many of our DELF correctors and examinateurs this year, as well as train a whole bunch of new teachers with the DELF.
And some other professional learning that we are engaging in that we maybe mentioned already is the Acadience Screener. We have a variety of educators who completed the training through Acadience and have some experience and the background to be able to administer that screener and analyze the data and find out what it's telling us about our students. We are going to begin next week our U-Fly training in the board with all of the, we're going to start with grade 1 and 2 educators, as well as our special education resource teachers and small class teachers, so that they have a good understanding of what that an explicit phonics program entails, and that they can begin to implement that with their students right away. We've also gotten some resources to help support that in their classrooms, such as word building mats and things like that, that they'll be able to take with them during those training days. We're continuing to our work with educators around phonemic awareness, phonological awareness, and Haggerty, and highlighting the importance that that can have on those foundational skills. We've been working with educators using that new ministry document from April, the Effective Early Reading and Instruction, a Guide for Teachers manual, as well as the Right to Read, and how they align with our curriculum document and can support those professional decisions that we're making in our classrooms to ensure that our students are all able to succeed and grow in our rooms and in our schools and our CDSB. And then finally, we do have Reading for the Love of It, a conference in Toronto at the end of February, where we have quite a large group of educators attending, and everyone's very excited to be able to participate in that and learn from that as well. There you go.
And yes, they do sleep at night. Thank you so much for giving us the time today. I'm thinking that we probably went over our 20 minutes, but I just want to say that it's really exciting this year to engage in some of the learning, because of the last 3 years of a pandemic, we've had to be very creative in how we provided support to educators. And it was going into classrooms and doing the best we could with the constraints that we were faced with. And so this year it's opened up a little bit with the fact that there's still a shortage of supply teachers. So that gives us a little bit of a challenge at times, but it's really exciting. And you can hear from the numbers of people that are expressing interest in engaging in PD that everybody is just wanting and hoping for this, and really excited to get back to the face-to-face conversations, because it's one thing to engage in learning, but to work with colleagues that you don't get to see and talk about things that are that all have a vested interest in, it really creates some dynamic conversations in our groups. So thank you for the opportunity today.
Just like to open it up to any questions or comments regarding this great presentation. So if there's anybody that has a question or a comment, start off with Dave.
Why not? First of all, thank you very much for what you do and the work that you do. I guess when I read this earlier, the one point of emphasis is that from my perspective is that we seem to be getting back to the classroom, teaching kids and educating kids, because as was just mentioned, COVID one factor, but there are other factors, and I think that we're getting sidetracked from what our true role and responsibility is, being members of the Renfrew County District School Board, and that's educating and preparing our students, right? So I really appreciate that. I see a lot of that in here, the specific, the measurables, things that are important to me from my background, and I greatly appreciate that. The other thing was empowering the educator. So I'm not an educator. I say that all the time, but both my parents are or were. So I hear this all the time about how important it is for professional development, put the resources and the tools in hands of the teachers and who are in the classroom, who are actually teaching the students. I mean, I have 5 grandkids in the education system. So I see that, and I see this year, and again, I know it's more normal year, how that's changed from the several, of the previous years. That. And the last thing is, I thought on the literacy front, I'd share with you a story. I don't see anyone in this room who would remember this. Dave Shields is no longer with us. Back, I think it was in 2002 or 2003, our superintendent at the time, Andy Ringlet, we had a presentation on literacy and how important it was, because it was a new thing back then. And they shared with us that the state of Illinois, maybe the lawyer would be interested in this, still use the state of Illinois, I think, grade 3 literacy test results to determine how many prison cells they would need in 10 years in their jails. So, I mean, my point is the emphasis on how critically important literacy is, just to getting people, our students, to that stage where they can be successful throughout the entire education system is so critically important. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Jody, do you have a question?
I didn't raise my hand, but I do.
Okay. I think Brian did, but you go next.
Thank you
Thank you.
very much.
I did have a question regarding the presentation, and thank you very much for the presentation. We've seen in the last few years an increase, and I think you touched on it at the end with supply teachers. How are we able to ensure consistency and the achievement that you have through this professional development with the large number of supply teachers? Are they also receiving continuing professional development?
The supply teachers aren't participating. Any occasional teachers that are in temporary positions are invited as well. And in order to try to maximize the amount of people we can reach, we've had to reduce the number of people that we can have attending a session so that it doesn't put too much emphasis on draining the system of supply teachers. So, it's right now it's offered to our contract and our LTOs. But I think, if through NTIP or our new teacher induction program, anybody that's new to the board gets that additional focus as well of having a mentor and being partnered with somebody. So there always is a partnership opportunity as well.
I'm just going to add that we've in the past, we had done sort of large scale, one huge day, whereas now we break it apart. So the same presentation is offered over numerous days so that we can strategically pull people from across the county, and there isn't, hopefully, Jacqueline, that strain on the system as a whole, but still ensure that every educator is allowed access to the learning and the opportunity to participate in discussions with their peers as well.
And sorry, to add on to that, which is kind of interesting as a follow-up is, so we're breaking our presentations apart and meeting with smaller groups, but then there's buzz. Those teachers go back to the school, they're talking about it. We're getting now emails going, hey, can I get involved? So our 4 days of, splitting all these educators up into smaller groups is turning into 6 days or 8 days. So it's a good consequence of what's happening with that too.
And there's just two quick little things to add on to that, sorry. So the smaller groups has shown to have some benefits because it may give others an opportunity to have a voice that they necessarily wouldn't have gotten and spoken up in a larger, say 50 to 70 people in a room as opposed to 15 people. So it just builds that trust and confidence in the class, in the learning room together, the learning environment amongst educators. And if, there are days where there's a supply shortage and those educators that were supposed to attend PD are getting called back just because the jobs can't get filled. They're not left to say, sorry, you missed out. They will go and circle back and try to be creative, whether they go into the classroom with the educator, go to the school another day and release. So it takes a little bit more time to get things accomplished, but at least we're still trying to be equitable that everybody gets that support and training and nobody is left out of it.
Thank you. I just one follow-up question, if I might. Are there available resources for, again, I'm looking back at these supply teachers who are coming more and more often, or maybe teachers who have been on leave who are coming back. Are there resources that they can access on their own to be able to catch up or to ensure continuity between different educators?
Yeah, so during COVID, the coaches really put a lot of time and energy into creating some self-directed PD. So on our website, there's also links to PD that can be accessed that will offer the current strategies, current practices, name the resources that are being used. So there's always independent choices that they can make to go in and just be up to date with the current practices that we're using in classrooms.
Great questions, Jody. Brian, do you have a question?
I didn't then, but I do now.
Okay.
First of all, I certainly agree with our colleague, trustee Kaiser. You do good work. You do amazing work in an exceptionally vital area. The kids really have to learn how to read and read with understanding. Without that, they're handicapped to the point of not being able to do much. So you do great work. Thank you very much for that. In terms of reading, literacy, of course, reading in many ways. What is the favored method at a time? I know one time I guess it was fonts, and then it was whole language. Phonics again?
The term that seems to be used most often is structured literacy. And that came from the International Dyslexia Association and as part of their strategies and their components that need to be taught explicitly, because in our whole language approach that sort of was happening widespread, it left some students behind because it was a lot about, if we expose them to lots of text, they'll notice that when we read this, it's always spelled the same. Whereas that left certain students behind because they didn't notice those things and often could fall through the cracks, and it appear like they were able to read, but really they were struggling. And then it would get to a point where they were just so far behind that they couldn't access the materials that were being used in those upper level classrooms and grades. So structured literacy pretty much breaks down everything, and it's, as the educator, you need to teach it, you need to tell them about this piece of language. So it goes all the way down to breaking the language into every individual sound that exists and how those sounds work together to build the words that we read and how we break them apart to write them down. So that is the approach where we're going, and that's what the information from that new ministry document that came out in April, that's what it's trying to highlight and inform teachers. We are expecting a new curriculum document for September, so we don't have a lot of insight into what that will look like yet, but that initial document from April is a nice stepping stone. It's been really valuable for our educators, I think, because a lot of educators were making a shift just from their own professional judgment. They saw that some of the practices that they were using and the strategies that they were using were not effective for everyone in their room. And so this is sort of year 4 that we've been in these positions, and we've slowly seen some educators reaching out saying, you know, I have students that what I've always done isn't working for them and I don't know how to reach them. And we were just sort of fortunate enough that we were sort of paying attention to what was happening in the United States with regards to right to read reports from there and what those recommendations were. So that's where we began to dig into phonological awareness and discovered Heggerty as a research-based resource that we could bring into our classrooms to help with that, and which sort of led us to the International Dyslexia Association that offers quite a bit of learning free to educators. Again, they're coming from their background of supporting students with dyslexia, but what those students need can benefit all of the students in our classrooms. And that very systematic, explicit approach allows for more students, a much higher percentage of students to flourish. And then hopefully that will also ease sort of our special education department so that they are supporting the tier 2 students who truly need more repeated practice and more attention, more detail done, and attention from educators to help them succeed. So that if we can shift the way that we teach in our classrooms, then the special education resource department and teams can then really support the students who would benefit from additional explicit instruction. And hopefully then we've got, you know, everyone 100% feeling very confident and competent in all aspects of literacy when they leave their high schools in Ontario, but on our county specifically is where our eyes are. But we're hoping that shift to a research-based approach that considers brain research as part of the instructional practice and decisions that are made will be much more effective and scoop up everyone so that they can flourish.
That was quite an answer.
You feel her passion.
I think she knows her stuff. So the structural awareness, that's the term for it now, is it?
Structured literacy.
Structured literacy, okay.
Yes.
And new term I hadn't heard before, phonological awareness. So there is a lot of the old idea
Yes.
of parts that in this.
Yes, a lot of the research isn't new. A lot of the research it's been built upon, but a lot of the research actually began in the 70s, and there's just, for whatever reason, it wasn't what was most was chosen to be the most popular way to approach it. And structured literacy does anchor similar into what other people have mentioned, that teacher knowledge, the importance of teacher knowledge, that it's not just here's the manual with your day, every day broken down for you and you just follow it. That by providing teachers with the knowledge and background around the science of education, that they can make decisions for the students that are in front of them that help that student and this group of students to flourish, as opposed to just sort of following a standard program or resource that's purchased. It's very much about educator knowledge and knowing what you're doing, why it's important, and how you can support a student who needs that.
Thank you for the answer.
Thank you, Brian. I believe Leo has a question or comment.
Sure, a question. Just how are you tracking both for, here you have literacy, so you have them like the cadence screening initially, and then you have the programs, the Youth Line, the Haggerty, and then similar with math, you know, I'm assuming you have some kind of assessment. So how are you keeping track of, you know, your progress with these programs over the years?
I'm always talking, always jumping in. I said, okay. So for our math, with our primary, junior, and intermediate divisions, in our primary division, we've done a lot of that early continuum training. So teachers all left with that training with one of 3 options in terms of a resource that they were going to use, although they're all parallel. They all follow a similar sort of learning path. And they are choosing a few students from their classroom that they would like to monitor. And then we're going in sort of a 6-week rotation just to follow through with the activities that they're using in the classroom, seeing where there's progress, supporting the teachers along this journey. And we're hoping to check in with the actual data to see growth 3 times throughout the year. Twice actually with our primary. And then with our junior division, we did a common assessment, and that was that little video that we looked at with that girl speaking. And we kind of had looked back at previous years, and often we're talking to our educators about the importance of triangulation with our data, right? And collecting in our assessments. And then we always give them a paper pencil task to assess their thinking and checking out their flexibility. And we're like, if we really could hear their voice, that's where we're going to hear their flexibility with numbers. So we designed a flip grid, which the students all had an opportunity to do in November, students in grade 4, 5, and 6. We met with those teachers to track where they aligned on a continuum for multiplication and division. And then again, tracked activities and ways, best practices in the classroom to promote that growth. We did see a little bit of some of that data wasn't super awesome because some students were new to Flipgrid, the technology piece. So we thought we've sort of reflected on that, and we thought we'll have this data that comes from that pie grid. We're still doing all that great practice. However, we're going to do that again in February and again in April. And we're actually choosing some different targeted numbers. We had picked a question from Math Up, and I think we needed a more specific numbers to really assess that flexibility piece. So that's what we're doing in our junior division. And in our intermediate division, we are really focusing in on engagement and that critical thinking through the building thinking classrooms in terms of collecting evidence and collecting data on those practices. We finished our training with our grade 7 and 8 teachers in November and December. So our plan was to go back to those teachers to find out the best way that we can track that. So that's a to be determined.
Very good.
Anything else I forgot?
Thank you, Leo. Are there any other questions?
Did you have a question, Karen? Oh, sorry.
Okay, none noted. I just, being the chair, I just wanted to make 2 brief comments. And the line that jumped out at me was engaging family partnerships. I think that's a really, really big thing. Sometimes it takes a little more time than we expect, but the benefits long-term after working in the system really pay off. And my second comment is, one of you mentioned the mini DELF at intermediate. I think that's a really, really good forward thinking, just to familiarize themselves with the DELF. I just think those 2 things are really being proactive in the long run. And just lastly, I just wanted to thank everyone, particularly Shelley and her group, for coming here today. And I believe Susan probably has something she wants to deliver to the group. And thanks again. We had some great questions, and you guys, as usual, did a bang up job answering them.
Thank you.
And Jody, thank you, Mary, and I know Lori.
Thank you so much.
I do great work. I really appreciate coming down.
Thank you.
Get these kids to read the right.
Thank you.
This.
Okay, so moving right along, our second agenda item today is Rethink at the Secondary report. And I just wanted to just very briefly encapsulate the purpose of this quite extensive work and documentation is to provide the Board of Trustees with an overview of the recommendations for consideration that have emerged from the second phase of the vision exercise regarding programs and services offered by the district at the secondary level, including pathways for English and French as a second language, FSL programs. So I just want to turn it over to our director, Pina Buffoni, as well as SO Kristen Rydell. I do know that a lot of time and effort with our new SOs gone into this file. And I'm sure as trustees, we really appreciate that. I've done a lot of reading. I've talked to Kristen on several occasions and really realized the work that she's put in on this file. So please, Director.
Sure. So no, thanks very much. As mentioned, I'll just give a brief overview from what was presented at the committee's meeting prior to the holiday break. So it's been a tremendous process, certainly one I'm grateful for, being new to the district and the opportunity to come in really at a school level and meet with all stakeholders in the system and look at the reason why we're all here for students to feel engaged at school and to learn. So as everyone is aware, there's been 5 areas, and I'll just focus briefly, kind of on the program pathways, and previously mentioned prior to the break, looking at the de-streaming of grade 9 and 10, and then certainly listening to various stakeholders and feedback from the system, and really wanting our educators and administrators to be in a position to really support students with what a de-streamed classroom looks like. What's really important to note, it doesn't mean that it's a loss of academic classrooms or a loss of applied classrooms, as mentioned. It is a new structure for a classroom. It's one where it's high expectations for all students. It's really anchored in kind of the 3 pillars that we discussed previously. So the importance of making those cultural shifts, but primarily for classroom environments and texts that are used, and just even approaches to pedagogy and voices and resources and such, really have a breadth of different cultural backgrounds so that students can identify and see themselves in the excitement of learning. So that's really an important shift, not just in our district, but provincially as well. With some of those systemic shifts as well, and looking at incorporating more culturally relevant responsive pedagogy, it's also the way in which we're assessing and evaluating students. And as you saw in the presentation today, mentioned, really a shift away from just the pen and paper type of testing tasks and looking at products, but more looking at ways that we can include conversations and observations so that we're really engaging the whole child and looking at their abilities on a number of levels. So it's a good opportunity for all students to have that, and to help certainly with them to equip them with global competencies that they'll need going throughout high school and then in their post-secondary pursuits. One really important thing for the CERP as well is just with the classroom
environment looks like. So I know in the past, I certainly had my own classroom when I taught. It was great, but it was kind of like, this is Miss Riddell's classroom, and these are all the things that Miss Riddell needs to teach kids. So kind of that shift now. This is a grade 9 classroom. It's got the manipulatives, it's got the resources, it's got the whiteboards, it's got the structuring, so that any grade 9 class, say for math, can come in and it's fully equipped to be responsive to all of the students. So really modeling classes, which teachers do anyway, but really being responsive to what is the student experience in the class each day for this. So many things with that focus of CRRP, and it going anywhere from resources to approaches to assessment to what the classroom environment looks like itself. As well is the importance of enhancing educator capacity. So that was a reason for continuing to focus as we are this year in grade 9 de-streaming, and looking forward, continuing with PD that we are doing in a variety of subjects, and certainly partnering with our other departments such as special education, anti-oppression and racism and equity, and of course our Indigenous education principals and advisors and the grad coaches themselves, and to help us look at what are the shifts that we're doing to help support teachers in professional learning, and then with all of the components that a de-stream classroom should look like. The last, which is just as critically important, is increasing student engagement and achievement and well-being. So part of this process, and a reason for really focusing on grade 9, is there are a number of things that need to continue to occur certainly this year and next year, so that our teachers and stakeholders in the system are really equipped to support a de-streamed environment, and then certainly that our students will benefit the best they can from that experience. Part of this as well will include looking at what resources we're using currently in the district to support learning. Also looking at achievement, so not just end of term achievement, but the data that's collected throughout the semester, and looking at the choices that students are making in grade 10. So part of the ministry commitment is that there's not going to be a swell of students entering into the applied program in grade 10 because it isn't available in grade 9, but really having high expectations for students in grade 9, best equipping them with what they need to be successful. And they can, in grade 10, choose to take applied, but they, hopefully will also choose to take academic. So what I'm saying here is we're not having, just because we're not offering applied in grade 9, that it's immediate default back to applied in grade 10. And that's something that, senior staff will work with principals. There'll be monitoring of course selection, which is happening in February and March, and looking at what students are choosing for grade 10. And there will be conversations prior to that with guidance counselors, and kind of like a list of things that guidance counselors need to consider, and the conversations that they're having with students. And everyone is always well intended, but just making sure that there isn't an increase in applied programming in grade 10 next year. So there's a lot to all of the secondary school review, and I know Pino's going to go through the 5 areas, but that was the main focus for the program pathways and the work that we have moving forward. Myself and Krista, Shelley, and a few other people, and Jenny and everyone are working on a plan for professional development from January to June, and to equip our teachers and certainly to make sure that the classroom experience is great for kids next year.
Yeah, just one last thing as chair, I just wanted to mention that because this is such a large document, approximately 115 pages, we've all done a lot of reading and a lot of discussion. I just wanted to make a note that there are, because of the number of recommendations in this document, I believe there's 5, and we'll be working through them one at a time and allowing for questions and comments, and afterwards we'll each vote on it. So sort of break it down. So Director
Thank you.
Buffoni, it's your.
Through you, Mr. Chair, and thanks Superintendent Rattel for all your leadership in this work. Wanted to just share from the report, building on Superintendent Riddell's comments. In preparation for the report itself, the detailed analysis of all of our secondary sites was conducted by educational consultant Alana Emo, who knows our district well and has worked through a number of the details of both course offerings and the analysis across grades of all of the elements that were mentioned with respect to applied academic programming, as well as a number of other factors that are in appendix or attachment A. In addition, as part of the review of secondary schooling, research analyst Teresa Bailey, a retired research analyst from the Algonquin and Lakeshore Catholic District School Board, examined the feedback and/or input provided by stakeholders at all of the consultative sessions in order to determine patterns or trends in the commentary, which is shared in attachment B. Although the feedback or input was captured by participants who were there in person, it was important that we ran a third-party independent analysis of that feedback for trends and patterns for the Board of Trustees. Further, there are 2 exchange summaries from the thought exchange platforms for students and parents, guardians, or community members respectively, which are provided in attachments C and D. And then finally, the recommendation shared herein in attachment E, which as our chair has mentioned for the today's purposes, we'll go through one at a time, outline the potential deliverables for the district system-wide. The recommendations take into account the following key considerations. The first of which, you'll find it on pages 2 and 3 of that document, are really the key drivers for decision-making at the school and system levels. They include our enrollment over time, but more importantly, our market share, our percentage of the number of students in the county going to the RCDSB schools, while being respectful and sensible in coexistence with other educational institutions. The second one is both the independence and interdependence of the recommended actions for each key area as they relate to the concept of integrative thinking. And that is that a decision made in one area will have some impact on a decision made in another area. And so it's important to highlight that we're really looking at integrative thinking so that the district characteristics that add value to the learning and wellness of students are at the forefront of our decisions. Third, the notion of reasonable representation of programs and services offered and operationalized by schools of the system. It is true, simply true, that we can't offer everything everywhere to everyone. We've got to make some decisions at a systemic level in terms of what's offered and ensure that there's reasonable representation of subject areas and disciplines so that students have those choices to be able to move forward in their post-secondary pathways. And finally, I'd like to take you through, beyond the 5 recommendations, a series of additional considerations to be actioned potentially that surfaced during the consultative sessions with stakeholders groups, but did not fit into one of the specific key areas of focus. So I wanted to share that. In addition, it's important to highlight that in the period of time between the release of the conceptualizations on the 20th of December and the formation of recommendations today, additional feedback or input was collected and was provided by stakeholders of the system, which this advice has significantly shaped the edits and revisions of the recommendations provided to the Board of Trustees today. If approved, a transition working group for the secondary school review will be established to action the recommendations during the period of February to June of this school year, as Kristen has mentioned. The working group will be comprised of representatives of the stakeholder groups that took part in the subcommittee for the vision exercise at the secondary level, and senior staff will follow up with a report to the Board of Trustees regarding the status of the actions or recommendations in June of 2023, including a follow-up to some of those additional considerations. So I'd like to just go to attachment E towards the end of the package and walk you through those recommendations one by one. They are noted in the report, but I'll give a little bit of context as I go through. Again, beyond the cover page and the table of contents, pages 3 and 4 give a bit of context, talking about those drivers for decision-making that were mentioned. One, enrollment. The second one is the percentage of students across pathways for our district. I also included a little bit on page 4 about the notion of integrating our thinking, as was discussed, as well as the series of pedagogical frameworks, universal design for learning, differentiated instruction, and culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy that Superintendent Riddell mentioned, that serve as foundational elements beyond the inspired learning framework and our lead with care, creative, or responsive environment approach for well-being that position the district well in the move forward to serve our students, our staff, and our school communities. In the first recommendation, you'll see the guiding prompts for deliberation were those notions we took to our stakeholder groups to talk about, to think about, to listen to. And then we shaped a series of recommendations. So first recommendation in the area of program pathways. Whereas the Ministry of Education Ontario has issued a memorandum entitled Next Steps for De-Streaming Grade 9 Course Codes and Descriptions for the 2022-2023 school year on the 10th of November of 2021 as part of the De-Stream initiative for the current school year. And whereas the Renfrew County District School Board is committed to academic integrity and curriculum rigor through the optimization of program pathways to apprenticeship, college, community living, university, and the workforce for all of its learners. Be it resolved that the Board of Trustees of the Renfrew County District School Board approve the development and implementation of the D-Stream framework for the upcoming school year to support grade 9 courses. And I've got an asterisk there that specifies on page 6 of the attachment E, which courses are D-Streamed for grade 9 through the establishment of a subcommittee for program pathways as an integral part of the transition working group at the secondary level for the period of February to June, with the framework to include the elements that Kristen highlighted: cultural shifts, enhanced educator capacity, and increased student engagement at the forefront. It's important to note the key element that was described by Superintendent Riddell around ensuring that we continue to have a focus of high expectations for our learners. Achievement data for grade 9 classes will be monitored, as will course selections for grade 10, to ensure that students have as many doors open for pathways as possible and are provided the greatest equity of access and opportunity to reach their highest possible potential. So that's the first piece of the recommendation. Second one, and that a French as a second language certification. Again, the second footnote gives you the 10 courses that would form the certificate for immersion, the 7 for extended, as well as the 7 possible that tie in at the extended level, the 4 core French courses plus 3 others that would lead to an extended French certificate, as initiated for the current school year with a multi-year implementation plan for all families of schools. So what we're saying there, and you'll see in the second footnote, is really 3 courses in grade 9, 3 in grade 10, 2 in grade 11, and 2 in grade 12. It's front-ended as a certificate to grade 9 and 10, covering compulsory courses so that as students get more choice in their latter years, they're not stuck against trying to get French courses to finish a certificate and engage in some other specialist program. It's front-ended in grade 9 and 10 to cover compulsory courses, which they need anyway, en français, and then lightened as a load in grade 11 and 12 in the event a number of those students want to engage in some other specialist program or focus program. So that's the intent of the layout of the courses, as you see there, with some site-based decision-making for one of the courses in grade 9, as well as some in grade 11 and 12 areas. It's important in the multi-year implementation that Board of Trustees understand that we asked schools, 5 schools that got it started this year, to offer the 3 grade 9. Next year, they're offering, in addition to the 3 grade 9, the 3 grade 10, and then building over multiple years right through to grade 12. So it's not an offering instantly of all 10. We're giving a multi-year implementation plan, and the Deep River and Madawaska Valley families of schools will be determined as soon as the students who are currently in the grade 4-5 area are coming up into grade 7 and 8. We start to establish that pathway in those schools to see it through to completion. The third one, and that specialized programs, including SHSM programs and/or focus programs, continue to be provided for grades 11 and 12 system-wide. It's important in the third footnote that you'll see the 36 SHSMs we offer right now across 13 sectors. We ebb and flow every year, and over the past 10 years, we've gone from 33 courses to 43. We ebb and flow, so we introduce some and we reduce some based on the interests of our students. So that is a fluid program with some additions and some retractions over time, but that's the 36 we currently have in place. And fourth footnote is on the focus programs, the two that remain in existence, the Osprey and the Tamarack at Opiongo High School and Mackenzie Community School respectively, that are really land-based programs that are unique to those sites that we've kept in place that met a certain definition for focus program, and I'll talk to that in a moment. The note at the bottom really gives the definition for both of those third and fourth footnotes. Ministry approved SHSM programs are comprised of a bundle of 8 to 10 courses in a selected sector, offered and operationalized for grades 11 and 12 with the potential to earn industry certifications. Focus programs of the district are comprised of a minimum of 3 interrelated courses offered and operationalized as a bundle in grades 11 and 12. And it's important for the Board of Trustees here to understand that for the focus programs, because it's only 3 rather than 8 to 10, it might not be offered every year. It might be offered every second year because it's 3 courses, and the students would be able to hook into that because it's a fewer number than the SHSM that really happens over the grade 11 and 12 2-year period. So wanted to share that as a first recommendation for the Board of Trustees. Open up for any questions that trustees may have on that.
Leo?
No, thanks. Obviously lots of work to get to this point. And just an important decision to make to move forward. I just have a couple of questions. One is, that's brought to my attention is just the hockey and basketball academies. Can you just go over what will happen to those programs moving on in the future?
Sure. Thanks, Vice Chair Boland. A couple of things. One is when we looked at the pressures of our system, the number of schools we have, the number of students in those schools, we really realized we needed to make some decisions on what we would be offering system-wide, what we could afford to offer, the impact on our resources, human, material, fiscal. Came to the realization based on the feedback from the Board of Trustees as well as our stakeholders around the needs of our students and the importance of the academic integrity and the curricular rigor, that what we've got on page 3 of the report, or page 6 of the attachment E, was a honing in on the critical elements, the de-streaming of grade 9, which is ministry directed, the French certification, FSL, which really was a commitment that the board made 5 years ago in the introduction of the FSL at the elementary level. Our parents and guardians at that time had made it clear that they didn't want to invest in our district for their children in kindergarten bilingual French or in grade 1, only to hear that we now can't offer it in grade 4 anymore. They wanted a commitment from us to see that journey through right to graduation, and not to hear somewhere along the line that we couldn't manage it operationally. That's easier said than done from an operational viewpoint, but it is part of the reason we have discontinued some academy-like structures to make sure we can run what we're committing to our parents. And that one was a commitment we made 5 years ago. The specialist high schools major programs is a third element, is a real strength of the Renfrew County District School Board. It's a wide array of specialized program offerings that cover culinary arts through to transportation, and really meet the needs of our learners. And that is an area where I feel as a district, we've not only invested, we've overinvested to make sure an array of options for students to see them through to some post-secondary pathway of their choice. The fourth one is the focus programs. Part of the reason we we kept that in place, as there were a few unique programs in schools that still met the curricular standards, interrelated courses, focused on our land-based learning, which is a huge element with our Indigenous partners. And so made the difficult decision to organize ourselves strategically. We're seeing the benefit of having done so at the elementary level. We had a number of diverse programs being offered at elementary 5 years ago that weren't standardized from a systemic level. We've seen the benefit of doing that and the consistency, the ability to market that, and the ability to honor what we're putting forward for our students. As a final comment, one of the ones that I'll make here is the immersion program is not for bilingual students. They're already bilingual. They should be learning something else. The goal here is to have our students into programs where they're learning, where there's a value add for them, either as an area of growth or to continue an area of strength. And some of the work that we found in other academies we felt could be covered through extracurricular, could be covered through their own personal endeavors outside of the school setting. And so really honed in on these being what we feel as staff is the greatest benefit of programming for our students, knowing full well that there's a whole number of things we could offer, but we can't afford to offer everything to everyone. We're simply not that big, but quite frankly, even the big districts can't do it either. So we've got to be able to make some decisions that we feel put our students in the most beneficial, value-added pathway for success.
Thank you. The other question I have is just with the Shazam. So you had said like roughly 36, and part of the emphasis of this recommendation is just French as a second language. Is there any, work to make some of these Shazams French or bilingual, right? If we're catering to try and produce bilingual students, it'd be a shame to eliminate Shazams from that program.
It's Vice Chair Boland, it's a really interesting question. It's come up in a number of different venues. One might be the specialized programs. The other is we're growing the immersion at the secondary level and the extended French, the FSL, where there are co-op placements. It might be another area where we could have a bilingual environment for our students. So it's not inconceivable, but it's not an area we've explored, extensively, because we feel if we're able to offer the certificate and extended or immersion, we can then offer the SHSMs and the English language and still give those students a real bilingual experience in our schools. There are pressures by offering the FSL, staffing, ensuring we've got qualified staff to deliver not only the language, but also the content expertise. And so it's not something we can't consider, but it's not what we've done to date to ensure at the very least we get that pathway through to grade 12 going for FSL, as is with the 7 to 10 courses.
Thank you.
Actually, that was my question. Sarah touched on that, with the staffing, being a person that did all the timetabling in my school, just the number of French sections that you're adding and the volume of maybe higher qualified people in some cases to teach those courses, like in a small school, does that mean people coming out of teachers college or with French backgrounds are at a greater advantage of getting jobs?
Trustee Dobson, in short, the answer is yes. Even without our expansion of FSL, if there's such a need for FSL qualified staff, as well as technology qualified staff. So there is some truth to what you're saying. There's a greater demand for certain areas. And those are just two examples. So you're quite right on that. Working with Superintendent Poirier, we've already had a look at our qualifications of staff around FSL for the upcoming school year at secondary. And I'll ask Jacqueline to jump in here because this is going to be an ongoing challenge for us for many years, as it's been at elementary. We think we're in a good spot with the offering up of that next layer of 3 courses for grade 10. But you're spot on with your point. We're going to have to monitor it, have an eye on it, and our outreach for FSL staffing continues as we speak. with various strategies to try and encourage staff to come to our district. There's a few areas where we've got some advantages. One is as a fairly well-paid province for educators. We're right across the river from one of the lesser paid in the country. I'm not making a statement on that. I think teachers work hard and are paid worth every dime they make. That way, it's just, that is a dynamic. The average salary in Quebec is less than it is here. We also live in a beautiful part of the country. And so there are elements, and we're in a great district. So there are elements we're trying to showcase for the acquisition of FSL staff. But even in Eastern Ontario, there are other parts of the country coming to Eastern Ontario to recruit FSL teachers from here. So there's no question there's a competition there. It's a really good point.
I just started thinking from a timetabling point in a small school, if there's a limited number of kids that wanted that section, as far as just the whole timetabling concern would be a bit of a trying to make it all work and fall in place with a small class of 6 kids. I just will think.
Yeah, as we create the pathways, we'll have to look at e-learning, the e-learning options, and you'll see it in that second footnote. There are some other opportunities. Of course, it doesn't matter what the subject or discipline, in-person learning seems to be favored over any other opportunity, but we will need to look at e-learning where you might have a class of 11 here that 7 more students can come into. Just an example from another school. We're going to have to manage that over time.
Brian?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. A lot of what I was going to attempt to say was already said by our director and far more complete. So thank you very much for doing that. One thing I want to say is that this is a generational effort. It really is. It's going to set the path for the next, dozen, 20 years or more ahead for this board, for the students that come through our schools and for the families that support them. And I think it's an amazing piece of work that was done. And essentially, I could say we started 3 years ago, but it was just getting off or the first meeting, and all of a sudden, well, school's out for the next couple of weeks, and here we are now. At the end of 3 years, basically in 6 months of work, 5 months of work, 4 months of work, and it reached out to all our partners. There were sessions, day-long sessions that were, at all our secondary schools and with the adult high school and all other groups as well. And we set out to listen. And I vividly remember one school where this one teacher wasn't really a whole lot accepting that we were actually going to listen. A little bit jaundiced in his point of view on that. From experience, he says, are you going to, actually listen to us? And we said, yes. And looking at this document now, I say, we certainly did. And I think that's very evident to, groups around who look at this and they can see, well, we talked about this. And yes, that does affect, our school in a very positive way. So we did really try to listen. I'm very impressed with this final piece of work that's come to us. Just 2 other brief little comments are probably kind of extraneous, but I am really appreciative, and I know that, we've been saying this as a board of trustees. The second paragraph, whereas the Renfrew County School Board is committed to academic integrity and curricular rigor through all the different programs. All boards are going to say that, but I think with the kinds of things that are being proposed here, we really mean that. We've always meant it, but now we're highlighting that. And, people, I think after a short period of time, we're going to say, oh, they really changed. Well, maybe we have, maybe we haven't, but at least people are going to perceive that we do an awful lot of good things, that we're trying to do things better. And that's going to appeal to students, to their families, to the community. And I'm sure that we'll be meeting the needs of our students better than we're doing now, and increasingly better as time goes on. And also perhaps, encouraging the students to try our schools. So really impressed with that. Certainly, you know, the whole idea of de-streaming, and we're focusing on that to make it's a very difficult transition to go from what we've been used to de-streaming as a notion. And so we're really going to put a lot of effort into trying to make sure that we do that the right way, so that when they do move into, well, eventually with the grade 10, and eventually then into the 11 and 12, where they make some real choices for their progress through the senior years, that they'll be able to do so in a very good way and have a solid background. And our board, as our director has mentioned, you know, we have 36 specialist high school majors, which is a lot more than some very much larger school boards. We're trying to meet the needs of our students as best we can, and it's an evolving picture. Sometimes we lose a few, sometimes we gain a few of these specialist high school major programs. And to say that, yes, they are here to stay as a concept. They're a vital part of the education for our students. I think that really says a lot. And there's going to be some centralization. The last paragraph, you know, says that any other certifications and or program specialization to be considered added or removed at secondary level beyond those specified later on in the report must be reviewed and approved by executive council and the board. That's really important. We are a system, and we were loud and clear at the various you know, meetings with high school staff over progress of a day, that you know, from some regard, that we are a system, and we cannot afford to allow, you know, individual schools to be going off in their own direction. Now they will have their own individual personality. Some will have some starting high school major programs that are quite unique or somewhat different from their neighboring high schools. But we recognize that we are a system, and we can do things better collectively in many cases than we can do individually. So it's an impressive piece of work, and I'm amazed. I know I attended 4 of the individual high school reviews, and impressed with the staff, how they took to the whole exercise, and they were really keen to add their voices to what we're proposing. And I look forward to see how it's going to be actually introduced and how it's going to work in the years to come.
Thank you, Brian. Jody, I believe you have a question.
Thank you. I had a few points, I suppose, arising from the presentation today, so thank you. My first point, I suppose this is more of a comment or a concern. When I heard Superintendent Riddell speak a bit about applied programming and how we're going to be looking to see if the students in grade 9 are then choosing applied versus advanced. And one of the concerns that I have is I believe that there is a lot of value in applied programming for many students, specifically that applied programming isn't necessarily less valuable. It can be very valuable for a lot of students, people in trades, for example, who wish to go to the trades, or who have who are going to need a more applied focus and not so much a theoretical focus. So if that's the case, I am hopeful that the assessment of de-streaming looks beyond who's choosing applied and who's choosing advanced, but rather having some, it might be better assessed by having interviews with students about how prepared and supported they felt in going to the stream that's going to be most beneficial to them in the both within that year and in further years, as well as to look at the dropout rates in the programs within those years and between grade 9 and grade 10, and the need for example, I believe it's SALs as a result of the de-streaming. So I'm hoping those might be some things that will be assessed and considered. That's my first point. I know there's 5 recommendations, so I'll be as quick and speak as quickly as I can. With regard to the comment Mr. Buffoni, that you made regarding bilingual students, and that the immersion program is not for bilingual students, but for those who are looking to be in intensive French. My concern there is that we put a ceiling on the learning. So for example, if someone achieves bilingual status by grade 10, I'm hopeful that we're going to make specific and targeted resources available for them, so that it doesn't feel as though if you come in strong in French, even if you're not if you don't have maternal French, but you come in strong, that you're not stifled. My third point is with regard to the point that trustee, I apologize. No, thank you. Made regarding the French as a second language staff in the county. As an employer in the county, an employer who employs professionals, my experience and the experience of many of my colleagues is that the implanted employees are not particularly steady, or it can't be necessarily counted on. Whereas if we have a strong FSL program now, we're creating the employees, we're creating the teachers who are going to be coming back and being in our school. So I think that while I certainly appreciate the concerns that you have about timetabling now, I think that this is an obstacle to get over to ensure that we have better FSL programs in the future. And then finally, number 4. And it's something that we had spoken out outside of this council meeting regarding the focus programs. I saw that there was a note about certifications and program specializations being added or removed at the secondary level, only doing so with a review and approval by the executive council and board. My question is, and I wanted to confirm, that this means that, for example, the 2 focus programs cannot be removed without the approval of the board. And so that was the one item I had, I wish to have clarification on.
Absolutely. Perhaps I'll let Superintendent Riddell start with the first one around distribution, and I'll cover the others. I captured them.
Yeah, no, thanks very much, Trustee Prima. So really great questions. And part of it, it's so the comment with applied. So what has happened provincially and kind of the whole movement towards de-streaming was looking at provincial data, and students who were usually, I'll say, recommended to go into applied programming, and it's a completely viable, important pathway. But they were students who, as we've discussed, who are Black, Indigenous, racialized, marginalized, LGBTQ students, students from lower socioeconomic, disabled students, and a lot of boys in general. So what would happen is, certain behaviors or unconscious bias of educators would recommend applied programming based on really limited factors. So there's a shift away from that is critical for it to happen. So the whole point of de-streaming, and the reason initially why we were looking at grade 9 and 10, is to give students the options when they're more equipped in grade 11 to make, okay, well, I want to pursue this, I'm going to go into college, or I'm going to go into university, or I'm going to do a combination of both, or I might, want to do the workplace. So it's looking at, though, that there isn't kind of that unconscious bias occurring again at the end of grade 9. And well, just the student isn't prepared so that it's a default, because it is important. So just making sure that students are being given, equitable opportunities, and more looking at grade 11. Certainly, though, depending on what a child wants to do in those conversations with the teacher and guidance counselors and parents in the community and such, looking at what's, what prospects are good for the child's future. But it was more to remove kind of that unconscious bias that has been prevalent in placement. So.
On the other parts, thank you, Kristen. The other areas, absolutely, the goal with the FSL program is to create a future environment, not only a future, a present environment where that bilingualism aspect, you're quite right, any student who is actually bilingual could indeed be in the immersion program, but the idea is to grow our capacity across both our official languages as a county and as a country, hoping that for the future, that will bode well for the county and also for opportunities for students as they go into their post-secondary and their workforce pursuits. Superintendent Poirier is doing a remarkable job around the staffing piece and managing that over time, because that truly is one of our greatest challenges. The kind of work that Caplan has to do in HR, in recruitment, retention, it's complicated, it's complex, it's tied to sort of content specialization as well. It's not easy work. The idea of the second footnote is to establish as tightly as we can what those courses will be so that we can predict staffing needs more readily into the future. I think one of the key themes with the review at elementary and at secondary here is we're not programming based on our staff. We're staffing based on the programs we have in place for students. That's paramount in our work so that we're not caught when there's, quite frankly, a retirement, a mat leave, or anything else. We know what to expect. So you're quite right. And your final point of that last note is indeed the case, that there wouldn't be an addition or removal. And the system needs to understand that, not only from a governance perspective, but from an operational one, that we don't have schools individually doing their own pop-up programs, because in the spirit of integrative thinking, that's going to have an impact on something else. Despite a person's individual passion or interest, we've got to look at the whole all the time and bring new ideas back to the whole to see, does it fit or does it not fit? And if it fits, does something else have to come out? That's the reason for the approval of additions and removals or deletions or subtractions in principle. And quite frankly, it's part of our policies. It's the way the board is to function in that way. And it will, I believe, in time be helpful for the schools to also see that. We're now be able to better gauge, can we afford to run what we're running for the students we have? And the goal here again is the market share piece to coexist with our very good partners in the sector. So.
Thank you. I believe the next question goes to Susan.
Thanks, Trustee Connect. Just a couple of comments. I just wanted to comment that I found that the amount of data and information that was provided behind all of this is overwhelming, but amazing at the same time. There's a lot of great information there that I'm sure not only, have we appreciated, but I suspect that the administration, the principals have also appreciated getting some of this data. And because it's available, of course, on our website, the parents, anybody can actually take a look at it. So I encourage people to do that if they haven't already. And I have to congratulate people for putting all of that data together to support this. I guess a couple of things in my mind. I think the timing is critical. We know how important momentum is around everything, right? And I do believe, just following up on Trustee Morrison's comment about the consultations this fall, I know I was able to get to a couple of them as well. Thought they were just excellent. Really appreciated the sincere interest that our educators had in putting forward their ideas and comments. And I think they felt safe in saying whatever they wanted to say, and we did listen, and I hope they see that when they look at the document. But we certainly appreciated that input, but also the input, of course, of students through a student senate, through thought exchange. So many opportunities for people to put information in, and tremendously valuable information that I think we'll probably go back to as years go by as well. But the momentum, it seems to be now is the time. We've kind of come through 2 years of interesting times and kind of a bit of stagnation because we couldn't do much, but now we're kind of ready. We're ready to roll. I think people are ready to move forward. I think it's very exciting that we can really promote the full French immersion now in our board. I think that's going to be a banner for us, and that we can carry that right through to grade 12, as well as our other excellent programming, of course, but that's a bit of a unique one. And I guess just to follow up, or I guess just to close off, I really see this as such a good focus on our students. This is really putting in place, in my mind, our motto of inspire, empower, achieve. So we always wanted to try to keep students first. And I think through this, we really are ensuring their success to the best level that we can as a board. So So thank you for all the work that's put into this. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Susan. Dave?
Sure, thank you. Just maybe to throw some support behind the FSL program at the secondary level. I mean, certainly being one of the trustees promoting the elementary FSL, took many years to put that through. This is just to me the obvious carryover. But the timetable issues and the staffing issues were all conversations we had 5 years ago. And we were able to pull it off. So I'm quite confident that while there are challenges and respectfully brought up, that we'll figure out a way around it. And the other thing I think just is relevant in terms of supporting that as an example that I think is relevant is I mentioned this internally, but my own daughter, my grandson's in grade 8. Is he going to St. Joseph's or is he going to Opiongo? And the main determining factor at this point appears to be, because he's in French immersion at Cobden, is he can continue French immersion. So if it's one student, it could be dozens, and it could be something that I think is part of, our discussions over the last couple of years on secondary review is, this could help us. I know market share is not everything, but it is something we have to deal with, bringing more students or keeping more students in secondary that might have gone to one of our Catholic schools with the thought that, wow, I can have my son or daughter continue on with French immersion with the ability to be partially bilingual, fully bilingual at the end of it. So I think that's my way of supporting that secondary FSL challenge that it's going to be.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I just want to be, as chair, just make a couple of comments. One, just adding to what Dave just said. Primarily, we are an English valley. We do have, 10, 20% that has some French or all French. I think that number is increasing, but I mean, been fortunate enough to, my spouse is fluently bilingual. And I can just speak from experience that there's been many, many doors opened for my kids. Not that they're any smarter than the students sitting beside them or the adults sitting beside them, but they've had many, many doors open. So if we're looking to our youth's future, it just gives them many more opportunities. That being said, just wanted to mention something that Pino mentioned earlier, and that is you, in the last 6 months to a year, I keep hearing these two things: ministry approved and industry certifications. They are things that truly have teeth and are recognized. And I can be honest with you, when I was doing my career with the RCDSB, I never really thought of those things as much, but being a trustee now, looking at the full umbrella, I really see the importance of those things. So, I mean, sometimes we have to weigh things as trustees, and it's been quite an education the last 4.5 years to grow as a trustee and listen to people around this table. And I can just see that with timetabling, as Dave said, Dave Dobson, we're going to have some real challenges, and we're going to have the naysayers, but generally speaking, put it simply, if we were able to do what we did in the elementary, as proofs in the pudding that we could probably do it in the secondary moving forward. It's going to be quite a significant adjustment period, but I see that going forward. So just looking at the full umbrella as a trustee, your education in the broad spectrum becomes much broader and your insight grows. So those are my comments as chair, just sort of summarizing some of the points that I see we discussed here today. Brian, did you have one last question?
No, I just thought it might be appropriate to make the
Yes.
recommendation now.
I just wanted to pass the first recommendation over to Brian Morris to read.
Thank you very much. It's a lot. Stay with me. Whereas the Ministry of Education Ontario issued a memorandum entitled Next Steps for De-Streaming Grade 9 Course Codes and Descriptions for the 2022-2023 school year on Wednesday, 10 November 2021, as part of the De-Stream initiative for the current school year. And whereas the Renfrew County District School Board is committed to academic integrity and curricular rigor through the optimization of program pathways to apprenticeship, college, community living, university, and the workforce for all of its students, or learners. Be it resolved that the Board of Trustees of the Renfrew County District School Board approve the development and implementation of a D-stream framework for the 2023-2024 school year to support grade 9 courses, with the exception of locally developed courses, through the establishment of a subcommittee for program pathways as an integral part of the transition working group at the secondary level for the period of February-June 2023, with the framework to include cultural shifts in schools and the system to identify and dismantle systemic discrimination and structural inequities, enhanced educational capacity for effective instruction, assessment, and evaluation in D-streamed multi-level classrooms, and increased student engagement, achievement, and well-being. And that French as a second language, FSL, certification be established for grades 9 to 12 system-wide, including certificates in extended French and French immersion, as initiated for the current school year with a multi-year implementation plan for all families of schools. And that specialized programs, including SHSM programs and/or focus programs, continue to be provided for grade 11 and 12 system-wide. And that any other certifications and/or program specializations to be considered, added, and/or removed at the secondary level beyond those specified in attachment E, A6, must be reviewed and approved by Executive Council and the Board.
I'd like to take a moment and ask for a seconder on that lengthy recommendation. David Kaiser. Thank you, David. Yeah. Are there any other questions or discussion items? Seeing none, all in favor? Thank you. Recommendations were passed.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll go through the second period of focus, initiatives for student success. Whereas the district is committed to the coordination of strategies and structures that allow initiatives of student success to move dreams into reality and beliefs into action for all of its learners, in order to inspire, empower, and achieve as an integral aspect of its vision, be it resolved that the Board of Trustees direct staff to create a resource guide for educators regarding the success of students to be in place system-wide for the upcoming school year through the establishment of a subcommittee for initiatives of student success as an integral part of the transition working group at the secondary level, again for the period of February to June, with the resource guide to include clarity of vision for student success initiatives at the RCDSB, consistency of roles and responsibilities of student success teachers and teams, indicators of success, including tracking and reporting measures, such as graduation rates, supports for the pillars of literacy and numeracy as core skills, as well as the global competencies based upon our inspired learning framework, strategies for engagement and re-engagement of students, and the exploration of possibilities to offer alternative programming for students, including options in person and or online that allow for more flexibility and greater personalization. And that one touches a little bit on the comments Trustee Primo was making around the SAL and other elements of that nature. So really, it's a creation of a resource guide. We're asking the Board of Trustees to consider as a recommendation. I want to thank Superintendent Smith in her role as System Principal Smith and Superintendent Poirier in her role as oversight of secondary for a lot of the legwork that's been done in this area, really this past school year before the current one, that really honed in on these areas as part of what we need to make more consistent system-wide, which has led us to the notion of resource guide. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Buffoni.
Any questions?
Yeah. Is there any questions, comments? David?
Just a quick question, and I should know this because I've talked about this. When is that going to come back to the board for just for us to look at it.
Sure, through you, Mr. Chair, it's a great question from trustee Kaiser. We haven't yet as a team sat down to iron out all of the elements, but in essence, if ultimately the recommendations are approved by the board on Friday, the 13th of January, we'll begin to establish the transition working group and those subgroups. We'll have a goal for the May long weekend for those subgroups to complete their work. That will give senior staff some time working with CAS or secondary principals to refine what it is that comes in order to bring it to the board for the June board meeting. So the work happening in the beginning of the second semester through to the May long weekend, buying us a little bit of time, not a ton, but a little bit of time to get it approved by board and then out to the system before the end of the school year so that our staff have a chance to mull it over before we go into the upcoming school year. Those timelines are tight, but we do feel we need the few months to get the work done because there is work to be done here beyond the recommendation itself.
Thank you.
Just
Leo has a question?
Just a comment. I know this is a smaller, wording than the other, but when you look at all the stuff that you have to do in a short period of time, right? I think it's, I'm looking forward to this. It's just gonna be a lot of information. That'll be good information for us. And I think it'll be also good for the students once, this comes to the board and we figure out, all the answers to what you have here, what you're asking. I look forward to that. Again, I mean, a lot of legwork.
Yeah, and thanks to Jenny and Jacqueline here, because they did a lot of that. Some of that legwork has been formula. We just have to put it together now and go back and refine some items. But a lot of the work here, in part, Jenny and Jacqueline had established some working groups last year. In some ways, this is almost like a recommendation that's already been in motion. So some of this work is well underway, but appreciate it.
Yeah, I look forward to the information and to implementing, what comes from there. Thanks.
Any other questions or comments?
Just
Oh,
a
Dave?
Question, and Jenny, you could probably answer this, we were together there for the Sal at Opiongo. I guess as a new trustee, just to clarify, like, is there a follow-up done after that would tell us what progress has been made into getting those kids back into a classroom, or like, I think we dealt with 5 different cases that day, and we're just sort of left hanging after wondering, like, is there gonna be an outcome given to us as to the success there?
Well, there wouldn't be an outcome necessarily given to you, Dave, but the process is essentially the SAL can be put in place and it can be renewed for up to 1 school year without bringing that committee back together. So most of the time, the process is in place for up to the end of the school year, and we know that's the time. And then the idea is that students are transitioning back after that. It can be extended for 1 school year without bringing the whole committee back together. But if a student SAL were to continue beyond that point, the committee would need to come back together. And so at that point, there would be, everyone coming back to have further conversations about the student.
I was just, as a new trustee, I was still a bit leery about the program.
But we do, we'll have conversations and follow up in terms of the students and to be able to say, no, they'll update us on how things are going and to be able to continue to monitor as well. But yeah, you'll see some of the students, you may come back to a SAL meeting for a student that you've been at one for previously as part of the process. Your colleagues will know that does happen. But otherwise, you can assume that the plan that was put in place has worked and the student has re-engaged back into the system or onto their next steps, but perhaps a continuing education or whatever that next step might be.
Thanks.
Any other questions or comments? I'd just like to make a couple. The line strategies for engagement and re-engagement. It is concerning to me as a trustee. I don't know how many other SALs have been done throughout the county, but I do know that there's a bump up of SALs. In part, it might be because of COVID and some students we have trouble getting to re-engage. But that aside, I know that I've had some discussions with teachers, administrators, broad spectrum of people about, we used to have a PAL program. I don't know what it would look like in the future, but there seems to be a strong voice to have something re-engaged in that manner. And I just think both senior exec principals, whoever needs to be in the mix, the frontline people are still working, if everybody puts their head together. I still think something could be done in that vein. I think that's really, really crucial. I think the teachers and the schools have demonstrated a need for it. I think that since it's been gone, I think that to some degree there's a void there. And I do know that our coterminous board, smaller board, still operates some sort of an off-site PAL program. I don't know what ours would look like, or if we would even call it PAL, but I just think that's an important note to make going forward.
Like, just for further clarification, the last bullet, as having been involved with this with Jenny, and the intention is that that last bullet is to do exactly that. So how can we run something, look at what we felt were the strengths of the previous program, what were some of the reasons why we discontinued it at the time,
Right.
and what would we look at moving forward to make sure that we have alternatives, because we do see that gap. And I think there's twofold, like you said, it's a bit of that, and then also the COVID impact is causing us to see increase as well currently.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that that was truly,
Yep,
no,
that's the intention.
okay. Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments?
I don't have any other questions. I don't think there's any around the table, so I would be happy to put this motion on the table.
Okay,
Do you want me to read it again, or I think
I think we should. Maybe somebody read it.
well, Director Buffoni did a really good job, and I think we can read it okay. I think it's fairly straightforward. So I just put this motion on the table, and we've been looking for a seconder.
Okay,
Mike.
I'd like to ask for a seconder. Jody? Thank you. All in favor? Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, the experiential learning opportunities, again, the district's commitment here to fostering outstanding educational experiences for all of its learners as an integral part of its mission. The recommendation looks at asking the Board of Trustees to direct staff to design a handbook for experiential learning. And I'll come back to that notion of a handbook in a moment, but one that encourages and or promotes the enhancement of community connected opportunities coordinated at both the school and system levels. And that includes some of the work from the ministry around the integration of career and life planning through the courses that we offer, clarity of parameters for cooperative education placements, the evaluation of job shadowing and job twinning opportunities, pardon me, not evaluation, evolution, as well as the establishment of multidisciplinary and or multi-course options to address diverse needs of learners. And so just for the context for the Board of Trustees, we actually do have a handbook for co-op education. What we're looking to do is expand that to be broader, to include a greater diversity or array of experiential learning opportunities. Again, I think this is an area that as a district, we demonstrate strength, but one that we want to sort of situate as a system-wide resource in a handbook for our staff. And it builds off of those parameters for co-op that we've got in place. So again, I feel like this recommendation is building off a work in progress for us that we've got in play. And I think it's probably appropriate now just to mention in attachment E, you'll see a note at the end of some of the work of these deliverables to say that the subcommittee that looks at experiential learning needs to also have an eye and work with the subcommittee that's doing the program pathways, the student success, and the one that's upcoming in the transition. So the notion of the transition working group is to keep those subcommittees interconnected, to make sure that one group's not heading off in a direction that has some outcome that's counter to one in another area. So I just wanted to mention, and it's not in the recommendation of the report, but in the context of attachment E, you'll see that repeated a number of times, that those groups need to be working together and checking in, and the steering committee, that transition working group, is really a steering committee that will see that through.
Thank you, Director. Are there any questions or comments? Jody?
A short comment. I believe that experiential education, as well as the focus programs that we have here in Renfrew County, really set us apart, particularly from larger urban areas, working in criminal justice, as well as being a very involved community member. I can say through experience and through told experience that there have been many students who were on the cusp of leaving the secondary program altogether, who have then come back and even made six figures that as a result, a direct result of their experiential learning education. I think this really is an inclusive approach. And as we're already so strong I know that there are already links within the co-op teaching community, but I think as you said, building on those links and formalizing them can only make us stronger. And I think that this is a fantastic initiative and one that's directly appropriate for us specifically.
Brian? Thank you, Jody.
Experiential learning is it's like the jewel in the crown. It's it can reach just about any student and whatever their pathway is, whatever the programming that they're taking, expose them to things that they had no idea even existed. Or really reinforce, yes, I do really want to do that, and this is my pathway. I think we do a really good job with that right across the district, and we need to continue to do that good job. We take the students from our community and we educate them in partnership with them. This is also another partnership involving the community, through individual businesses and whatever, in the education of their students in non-conventional sitting in the desk and right that way, but learning, as the kids say, real life like this. So.
Susan?
Just a comment as well. I see this one particularly connecting nicely in with our strategic plan, where we definitely talk about those community engagement, really reaching out to the community more than we've ever done before. And as you say, that we've sort of got a beginning of this document, and I suspect that we'll have lots more best practices brought forward in discussion with other boards too. I mean, other boards doing very similar things. But I think that community connectedness, wherever we can reach out, wherever we can connect, we can tell the good news story we do here at RCDSB. I think that's going to be a benefit to us down the road, and of course the student success. Absolutely. So good one.
Any other questions or comments? None noted. Like to ask to make a motion.
I make that motion.
That's right. Leo makes the motion to accept the recommendation. I'm looking for a seconder. David? Thank you. Which one? David Dobson.
Just so Shelley.
All in favor? Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Virtual learning environments, also a very important key focus area for our district. Whereas the Ministry of Education issued a memorandum entitled Online Learning Graduation Requirement in February of the current school year, February 1st, of the past year, where students must earn 2 online learning credits to obtain their Ontario Secondary School Diploma, as outlined in Provincial Policy Memorandum 167, starting with the cohort of students who entered grade 9 in 2020-2021. So this is a memorandum that catches a sort of slice of time, applies to that cohort moving forward. And whereas the district is committed to the provision of virtual learning opportunities of the highest quality within a modernized education system for all of its learners, be it resolved that the Board of Trustees direct or approve, the deployment of a device. This is a cover protected Chromebook specifically to every student in grades 7 to 12 system-wide, beginning in the 2023-2024 school year. I want to really thank Superintendent Cousineau and Manager Feebig for coordinating this as an evolution of the ICT plan for our district. Students will receive a device at the start of the school year. Now, the note here is going to be adjusted slightly, so it doesn't affect the recommendation, but what I'll just share here briefly, and I'll ask Ronald to give a little bit more detail, is we'll have a cycle for the replenishment of devices. It won't necessarily need to be annual. And I wonder, Ronald, if you don't mind just giving it a little bit of context for the Board of Trustees. It just differs slightly from an annual sort of a replenishment. Just a bit of a briefing, I think, would be good context for our trustees.
Certainly, based on the fact that the devices will be Chromebooks, they don't need to be upgraded or maintained in terms of an image or software. It gets done automatically. So there's really no purpose to collect the devices at the end of June and just have them sitting at the school. So the devices will stay with the students. And the current thinking with Doug has been that the new devices would be deployed to the grade 9 cohort. So as they move forward in the secondary grades, 9, 10, 11, 12, they have their newer devices, then those devices that then get collected and repurposed in the 7 and 8 grades. So that would probably be our cycle, and that's based on best practices and other districts that Doug has been consulting.
That's really cool. And the second part, oh, I'm sorry. go
Just
ahead.
one quick question. I know at one time we were discussing the fact maybe a $5 cost to each student for, I think that was just a suggestion, and then that money would be used for revamping. And has that been pursued at all, or is it just the kids are gonna get the Chromebooks without any cost?
We're looking into it, Trustee Dobson. It's a good question. We're sort of weighing the pros and cons. There is some value to some, even contextually for students to realize a small contribution so that don't feel these, grow on trees, so to speak. So we're looking at that. We're working as Superintendent Kuzna said, and Manager Feebig in here, working with other boards, Waterloo Public Board, for instance, who have got a bit of a fee for repair or that kind of thing in place. We're looking at that and trying to figure out how to situate it so that it's not a barrier to any students. And of course, an important point here is if a student has their own device and wants to use theirs, they'll hook into our system. There's no problem. It's not a mandatory piece. It's for those students who would like one and need one. So we're looking at those factors, and we'll, for that report in June, provide a bit of the detail on what we've determined, what makes sense, and bring that forward for.
That to be an amendment to the motion then?
Not necessarily, because it would be an operational matter. The part that the board would approve is that we'd actually distribute devices, and then we would operationally figure out, do we have a fee that becomes a bit of a pot for repairs or not, that kind of things. But we will bring that back once we've done more exploration of the board in June in that culminating report, so that you're aware.
Yeah, and just so we're gonna start next year with just the grade 9s getting them. Everyone's gonna get one, but the
Yes.
cycle will.
Correct. Everyone will have a Chromebook, 7 to 12, effective September 2023. Through his contacts, Doug has just secured a significant number of devices. So we will have those, but then the upkeep, when those devices have reached the end of life after 6 years, the newer devices are going to be deployed to the grade 9s and then work their way through.
Great, thank you very much for the clarification. Yeah.
Jody?
Two, I suppose concerns. One is with regard to having a student have a device and then have it for the full time. As someone who has been diagnosed with ADD, I can barely keep library books for 2 weeks. Like having a high school student keep it for 4 or 5 years, especially over summers, really concerns me in terms of the likelihood that they come back in good working order. And I guess my second concern regarding anything if students who are already privileged enough to have these very expensive devices don't need the devices being supplied to them, then the only ones who would be paying that fee are the people who cannot already afford the more expensive devices. And I think it's unfair to put the tax of repairing the devices on those who have the least amount of finances available to them.
I think through you, Mr. Chair, Trustee Primo raises some really good points, and there's sort of weighing in the balance what we do here to make sure we don't actually sort of drive the inequity versus the other way around, and good intentions, and then the impact comes out differently. We're working with those boards to see what the trends are. One of the things I can share, and I'll ask Superintendent Kuzno to jump in here, but one of the things that Manager Feebig is getting his feedback is the students don't seem to be breaking the devices as much as either, losing them kind of thing, sort of, they're somewhere and the child can't find them, as opposed to actually not being able to handle the equipment. They seem to be pretty astute, and even quite frankly with personal devices, they're able to manage those. So I think we'll see over time that where our areas of wear and tear are, but it doesn't appear to be that they're actually damaging them or that kind of thing. So that's a good sign for us that hopefully we won't have this huge list of repairs every June. But we will monitor that, and we are working with other districts to see what are their trends, how many are coming back that need, some type of a refurbishing. And as Superintendent Kuzno mentioned, most of the upgrades in the Chromebooks happens without the students knowing. It's just an instant off the cloud, I guess, or however that works. I'm in over my head, but that happening on its own versus having to bring it in for a kind of.
Sorry, if I can just a bit more clarify my question. My concern is the losing it, and it seems if you have to return it in June when you're still in school and then get it back in September, you're more likely to keep it. Or maybe did I misunderstand?
No, our intention was to keep it with the students on balance, except for that grade 7-8 period, and then let them have it for the high school. But it's something, if we see that becomes an issue, we can always institute an operational change, say, okay, students, we're realizing you're gonna need to hand this in the last week of June to make sure that we keep, so we'll keep tabs on that. And as more districts shift to a one-to-one, it's become the new pencil case in that way, we'll be able to track what is our loss rate and that kind of thing. I just think that's another reason, in principle, the recommendation is as such, but there are some operational pieces we're gonna need to hammer out and learn from over time. So I appreciate the comments, and to be honest, it's been part of what we've been wrestling with on what's the right model here. And I think I'm confident Superintendent Kuzno and the team will figure it out.
I'm just going to make one quick comment about what Jody and Peter have been saying, and then I'll pass it on to Dave. And that is, our teachers know our students. So if there is one class, there's 3 students, another class, 5 students, another class, 8 students, our teacher X has a relationship with a student and says, hey, look, we know that you have this difficulty, I think I should just keep it for the summer, not as a punitive thing, but just say, hey, what are our chances, Johnny, of getting this back, really? Just sort of, because they know their kids. And it could be something like that worked out. And so that when they're given teacher reads that statement saying, look, the responsibility level, just that comments noted. Dave?
Well, I agree with my colleague that we shouldn't charge anything because it's not an equitable way to distribute it. But secondly, and again, I apologize, I'm trying to do a little bit of work here too. I thought we did talk about budgeting for loss. We know we're going to lose some. We just know that's a fact. So we have to budget for that. But I thought we were giving them back in June. I thought that was part of where did that change and why? I must have missed that because that was sort of the important part about refurbishing them. And then again, I think it creates some accountability for the student that they know they're going to have to return it in June. They get to keep it right through the summer. That's when, to me, that unless they're taking summer school and they apply to keep it, that to me is part of that accountability that helps us reduce the loss. Where did that change? I missed that.
Fair point, Trustee Kaiser. It's been in the evolution of the work with our ICT team. A couple of things. One is it's part of my misunderstanding. Some of those upgrades happen automatically, so it's like a requirement to bring the device in. It doesn't preclude, especially if students feel, I think I'm best at us storing that somewhere on site in the school and reissuing it to them in the fall, but it doesn't have to come back centrally. Some students may be taking summer school courses, which was another element that started to come into the mix of the discussion, how we would manage that. And the third one, I think, was the notion that an annual wasn't going to be a value add for the students. And that's where we decided, okay, 9 to 12 get those new ones that come through for their time period, and the 7/8 get the refurbished ones. That's sort of where we landed. So in fairness to you, it's been an evolving operational piece that we're just going to sort our way through, in addition to the financial element that we just want to think about. And as mentioned earlier, as Doug and Ronald talk to other districts, figure out what's the loss, or all of those pieces coming into play, and what's the loss over summer versus loss, on a weekend in the middle of April or something.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Leo has a question. I'm finally allowing him after my third.
I don't know what I did to punish like that.
I know. Nice guys.
Down,
Yeah.
Oh, thanks. So it's just more or less a comment. I know we had passed like a budget roughly about $1 million just for these devices, right? So it's nice to see that it's going to go to students and it could only benefit them and help them you know, and their long-term goal here with us, you know, over the 7th and 8th and then in high school, it can only benefit them. So it's just a good thing, a good news story here. Thanks. Yes.
If I may, I know I'm new here to the job, but one of the things that I think excites me about promoting this plan is this piece in particular. And I think kids are gonna go crazy for it, so are their parents. I also have ADD, and so I completely, but you know, one thing, I rarely lose my iPad or computer, but I will lose other things that they do become, but I think there is something to be considered, air tags, where you can now, for people who are diagnosed, so we can look at, you know, some of those different options that are available in technologies for people who have been diagnosed, but it's not my area of expertise, just my own personal. One thing I think that in terms of the promotion of it, if it is handed in at the end of the year, then there isn't that sense of ownership through the year. And so I think it also equalizes the students who do get to have it on their own with students that aren't in the position to have their own iPads and whatnot. So I think in terms of really branding this and promoting this across the county, the idea that this is something that kids get to have for their whole school year, and that equalization is really going to, I think, be a huge draw, together with a number of the other items in the package. But one thing that I think we'll have to consider also is that once we promote this, we're going to grow our market share, no doubt. And so we might need to get more devices in some of the earlier years as people, you know, want to bring their kids into a place where they're getting the technology they need for the future and today.
Thank you. Who else? Oh, Taylor.
Well, I had two things. The first thing was it's a very good idea, but going into it thinking, oh, what if they're gonna lose it? Students could maybe sense that and think, oh, well, if you think I'm not gonna handle it, maybe I'm just gonna prove you right, kind of thing. So definitely like just touching on your like, instead of taking that action of like, maybe we should avoid it because of this, just taking that step as in, okay, well, if they lose it, we have this in place in case of that, is probably maybe a better representation of what we should be representing, instead of saying we feel we might not be able to trust certain students, kind of like that, because that's not equitable. And then also, if this goes through and everyone in high school has their own Chromebook, would that mean that areas like Shazam classrooms or student success classrooms wouldn't have any more of those like would they not have their own supply, or would classrooms still have that?
So to answer number one, I appreciate your comments about messaging a positive approach to being confident in our students to handle this technology. I think that is well received. Thank you for sharing that perspective. The second piece, yes, devices will be redeployed. There will still be a bank of devices available at the school level. And we're still trying to figure out whether it's in a library or in a larger school. It may be a couple of areas where there are tech tubs. But we will not have the necessity to have as many tech tubs because every student will have their own device. But we do anticipate that there will be days where Taylor's going to show up at school and Taylor's left the Chromebook at home, so there is one available. So there will be that complement still available at the school. The necessity for the number of devices that currently are in tech tubs will diminish greatly, but because we will be using some of those to redeploy to ensure that everyone has a device. And I've heard people speak to branding and promoting all of our covers for the Chromebooks, which will make them more durable, because a lot of the damage is from dropping it or bumping it. So those protectors will make them more durable, are all going to be branded with our board logo.
Okay, it's okay with you, Ms. Chong, do the second part, because it's
Yeah.
also important, because I know that's.
Okay.
And that taking into consideration the challenges and opportunities of e-learning and v-learning as modes of delivery, which the district does rely upon in order to offer viable pathways for options for students. A series of system-wide strategies to support the optimization of virtual learning opportunities for students and staff at each secondary site be established for the 2023-2024 school year. This really is about ensuring that we look at, again, when our option sheets go out, or they come back with what students are interested in taking, that we explore not only what's offered in person, but what's offered through e-learning and what's offered through v-learning. I know that that's a complex endeavor, and our supervisory officers overseeing our schools and our families of schools will be looking into that and supporting them. But we will need to weigh decision-making on where those cut points are. If v-learning can really benefit in a certain area where there's a course happening and other students can be merged in, by all means. And I also want to make the comment here and really respect the feedback we received between conceptualizations and recommendations from our Federation Union partners and all of our stakeholders, just to make sure that we're not overdoing the e-learning piece at the expense of the in-person and the other way around for v-learning with e-learning. So we'll look to keep those in balance. We're not looking at this particular aspect of this recommendation as some type of a automatically cost saving. We're just looking at it for optimization. It's not a cost savings piece from our perspective as staff. It's really what's best for our students, which courses are better offered online versus in person and the other way around. So I did want to share that second part because it was something, and I know Trustee Kaiser had mentioned some really good points around ensuring it's happening at each of our secondary sites in the best possible way we can, and that's the spirit of this. But that's very complicated and comes back to that point that was made earlier that Trustee Morris made on the coordination that has to happen site to site with all the interests of students, what we can offer, our staffing, and these various modes. So wanted to make sure that was in place as well.
Any other questions or comments? Noted. Anybody want to,
I move the adoption of this motion.
okay, thank you. Bill, any seconder? Kim second that. Thank you, all in favor? Thank you.
Thank you through you, Mr. Chair. We're working our way through here. This next one's the last of our recommendations, but then there's an other section that we'll cover. Transitions to and from secondary school, also very important. You see, of course, the prompts for deliberation that we spoke to at our secondary sites. I do want to share with the Board of Trustees, one of the elements that you'll not find in the recommendations that was part of the discussion on site at each of the 8 sites, including adult and continuing education, was the notion of moving the district 7 to 12, the secondary level system-wide. It's not part of the recommendations, in part because there was a fulsome enough set of recommendations to get us going in this direction, but that is a concept that we may return to at some point in time as a district. To be frank, in the Arm Prior area, we're having to do it for next year anyway, simply because our numbers at elementary are growing to such an extent that we need to move students from one of our elementary schools into the secondary school. So it's just something that I wanted to bring to the attention that didn't form a recommendation, but we've not lost sight of it as staff, and I know the board has not either. So whereas the Renfrew County District School Board is committed to the seamless, successful transitions of its students, along with all other transitions, not only into secondary school or out of secondary school, but pre-kindergarten through to adult, for all of its learners, be it resolved that the Board of Trustees direct staff to prepare a protocol of promising practices. This is to guide transition planning to be in place for the upcoming school year through the establishment of a subcommittee for transitions as part of that transition working group. And that protocol or proposed protocol would include orientation processes for the introduction to secondary schools of the district. A lot of comments here that must start much earlier than grade 7 and 8, around grade 5 and 6, when students are really starting to think about where they envision themselves at the secondary level. Transition planning processes for post-secondary pathways across grades, especially in grade 11 and 12, with some of our students asking for it to happen earlier than grade 12, so that they've got lots of time to think about options that are put in front of them before they're into the applications for various post-secondary pathways. Very good feedback from our students. Consistency of roles and responsibilities of guidance counselors and other pertinent staff. This is parallel almost to the student success discussion around student success teachers and teams. And then the final one is clarity of expectations for graduation leaving ceremonies. Some schools offering a certificate that's recognized at graduation, other ones not. Making that system-wide at least as a baseline so that there's consistency across the district for our stakeholders. And then if there's site-by-site tailoring or differences or something that, as Trustee Primo mentioned, some of the focus programs don't happen everywhere. There can be some unique parts to a schools, but some of it being baseline, that would be an expectation for graduation leaving ceremonies. And that supports for the transition of students as they mature out of compulsory education. So this is the 18+ years of age group and may not yet be on track to fulfill graduation requirements, including the prior learning assessment and recognition aspects be developed and implemented as part of the cyclical review of adult and continuing education scheduled for next school year. So the timing is really good on this one. Of course, we spent some time with our adult and content staff. Superintendent Kuzo will be leading part of that cyclical review next year. We're going to look at elements of transitioning, including something around adult and continuing education that ensures that what we've got in place for our 18+ learners is the best it possibly can be for the district. So that's the recommendation around transitions to and from secondary school.
Any questions or comments? I'll get Leo first.
Thanks. So I'm on this good list again. Just a couple of comments. So I like the idea that we're going to be looking at kindergarten as well, like going into it. For those of you who don't know, I help with a daycare in Pembroke. And one of the things that we do to help prepare those kids before they go to junior kindergarten is that we would do some field trips, so they're on a bus. And then towards the end of the year, we do a little trip around school with the kids, and we hit all the elementary schools. So if somebody's going to Rockwood or, whatever school they're going to go to, we'll make a stop. We'll say, Johnny, here's where you're going to go. It's kind of like the bus you're going to be on, so they get an idea of what school they're going to, and a little ride on the bus. And then we usually stop at room for a little treat. So it's all a good, yeah. So it's a.
We'll go next time.
But then when they get on to the school bus in September, they're expecting to go to a Broome, right? So. But that's the idea, right? So you want to have it so that people coming into junior kindergarten, they feel comfortable. It's like, oh, there's my school. I'm familiar with it. I know my teacher, right? And then the same thing when you're going to into secondary, so that you have a good relationship with your high school, that you've developed it over the last couple of years, so that when you do go there in grade 9 or whatever grade it is that you're going to be going into, that you're comfortable in there, your way around, who to talk to if you have issues and problems, where the washrooms are, like all that. I look forward to the report and what's going to come of it. So thank you.
Thank you, Leo.
Thanks.
Any other questions or comments? None noted. I just wanted to make one comment is I do know that we have a lot on our plate with all these recommendations, and I know we've got some pretty tight timelines when it comes to doing some of this work, but I just can't understate the point that our director brought up about at some point in the next couple of years exploring grades 7 to 12. I just think that's an idea that we really shouldn't get lost on. Other than that, I do know that we've had a lengthy discussion today. I just wanted to take a motion on the recommendation. Is there anybody who wants to? Dave? And I need a seconder. Recommendation 5. Dave, the other Dave. Dave D. Dave Dobson. All in favor? Thank you. And last but not least, I believe there's a final page for other considerations. regarding
Thank you to the
Rethink.
Board of Trustees for your endurance. Today, I wanted to share a series of other considerations for really for senior staff and the Board of Trustees. I realize these aren't recommendations, but I guess as context, two parts. One, I do have to credit our stakeholders, our Federation Union partners, the board, members, senior staff that helped adjust some of the concepts as they became recommendations. In addition, there are a series of recurring notions that came forward that didn't fit the key focus areas, but that were still important to our stakeholders. And so we've noted them here, and I'll just share them for the board's consideration. But ultimately, the most important point for the Board of Trustees, while the subgroups are working on the various elements that we've just approved, I and other members of the senior team will be working on these additional considerations to bring back in June any progress in various areas. Excuse me. So the first one is the coordination of a return to a subject council structure system-wide for professional activity and purposeful networking among staff of the district. To be honest, even before the secondary school reviews, formal consultations came into play, this notion had been coming up. And this is another good example, similar to what Superintendent Poirier mentioned earlier around, the PAL discussion, when you remove it and then you see what's been missing. This is a past structure that was in place across districts, but had been removed because predominantly the focus of the learning had strayed a bit. Excuse me. So in response to the feedback and our input provided by our stakeholders, senior staff commits to the consideration of a subject council structure on one form or another during a portion of a professional activity day for staff of the district annually, beginning in the upcoming school year, with the agenda for each subject council coordinated and approved by executive council. So we would work with subject council leads, with our system and school leaders to establish a portion of the day. For the benefit of the Board of Trustees, we in the next few months will get into, and I think it's Superintendent Smith who's looking after it, the school year calendar. We'll know that school year calendar sometime in the late winter, early spring. We'll then be able to come back to you in June, having selected the half day or the day or whatever it might be that we dedicate for the upcoming school year to this, in order to see this through. And this is genuinely stakeholders' desire, predominantly staff, to, if you're a tech teacher, combining with other tech teachers to share best practices or whatever it might be. So that's the first of the four that really emerged and didn't fit one of the other key areas. The second one is equally important, the allocation of one-time funding for artistic, athletic, scientific, and/or technological initiatives, as well as the creation of a cycle for the responsible replenishment of resources dedicated to these system-wide initiatives and/or projects over time. This is really about some of the conversations on site with our equipment, our stringed instruments, reeds, our technological machinery that may or may not be in use. The idea here for the arts, for athletics, for sciences, and for technologies, including beakers, or maybe it's test tubes, I'm not sure, that we would have a one-time boost of funding to make sure it's an acceptable level, capitalizing on the review of secondary and making sure we're up to speed. And then it'll be, quite frankly, my job and the job of senior staff to establish a cyclical span where we can afford to do these replenishments over time, so that we don't need one-time boosts up of funding. Sometimes you do, but hopefully the cyclical piece will keep it in place. And I'll just give you a very brief example. In the arts, it might be related, I mentioned stringed instruments, reeds, could be props and drama, could be supplies and visual arts. Those are just some examples, but the notion is exploring this. In the athletics, I do want to state for the Board of Trustees and of course senior staff that I'm not adverse to basketball or hockey or soccer for that matter. I can speak firsthand about how important it is to, in my own family, but that we support that in that extracurricular environment. And one of the areas that's come forward with in athletics is schools that find it difficult to support students when they've made it to OFSA or EOFSA, because those are big ticket costs. would we consider a central fund that helps to support that? If we analyze the number of schools that go to OFSA every year and figure out what the average might be and try to find funding that would support that, knowing what that average would be. Might go up one year, less the next year, but figuring out something to support our schools, because that's a challenge, especially if it takes place in Thunder Bay or something like that. The third one, again, the sciences, and this is not only an equipment piece of beakers, but also the kind of chemicals we have in place in our schools. There are various chemicals that shouldn't be within contact of other chemicals. There needs to be an overview of that, not only from an educational perspective, but a Ministry of Labor one. Just an important bump up of funding and then a cyclical review to make sure everything's in place that we need. And technological, talked at length with staff about various elements, ensuring our equipment is safe, up to date, prepared. All of those important pieces are part of what, in response to the feedback, our review of initiatives or projects related to our subject disciplines noted in a comprehensive report on potential next steps coming to the board by the fall, but we're aiming for that June report. We're aiming for June to have a look at that. The third item is the exploration of enhancements or opportunities related to certifications or other program specializations for students in the district. And this goes back to the first recommendation that that's not the be all and end all of programs, that over time we would analyze programs and certifications that come forward if they're of merit, and we'd consider it. One great example here is AP, Advanced Placement, as one of the options we would explore as a district. There are others, but it's the point being that it was brought to our attention from stakeholders, including our board, that they want senior staff to continue to have an eye on innovative programs that we need to bring into consideration for the district. And so there's a commitment there to provide a report on what we determine, again, aiming for June, but fall at the latest, but again, we're aiming for June. And last but not least, establishment of a funding structure to support teaching and learning environments. And this builds off the recommendations of the School Design Standards Working Group. That group finished its work in the fall of 2019. We were just starting to look at it in the winter of 2020 when the pandemic broke out, and we just haven't had a chance to return to it. And that came up in our consultations, and we commit to a return to looking at those recommendations. How can we make our teaching and learning environments even greater places to teach and learn? So those are the additional considerations for the board's I guess not approval, consideration, all to say senior staff is committing to bringing those back and happy to answer any questions on. Those are the ones that emerged the most, to be honest, of the consultations, but again, happy to answer any questions.
Just a couple, thank you. So on the footnote of the athletic, scientific, or technological initiatives and one-time funding. So I think from my perspective, and again, it would obviously have to come back to the board, I think that we almost want to look at expanding that. So one of the areas that I think we need to improve on at the secondary level is building a culture where, I think there was a better term for identity in our high schools. Because of COVID, I think for the most part, our high schools have become buildings, institutions that people go to and they leave. There's no ownership, there's no identity, there's no culture, there's no chess club, there's no band, there's no any of these things. And I mean, I know there are some of them starting this year, but I see, I mean, I'll retract a little bit and say, you know, I don't know exactly what our reserves are, but back in 2001 or 2, the board was concerned about the fact we only had $11 million in reserves, and we were worried that, you know, they were going to be depleted, and now I think they're 18 or 19. So, I mean, I think we have the reserves to spend on those types of things. One-time funding, yes, and we always talk about using reserves for sustainable funding areas, but this might be the exception in that. And I would go as far as to say as well for professional development. So, I mean, we have challenges with like supply teachers and things like that, but I would almost be willing to, you know, use some of that one-time funding for professional development as well. But my main point is that in this area where we want a band in the school or a marching band or a chess club or, you know, a badminton club after, whatever it is, extracurricular activities, busing, those types of things that really, to me, stand for what high school should be about, not just you always hear me preach about the academic side, but there's also other aspects to high school as well in terms of that identity. I think that's the better word than culture. So I know if administration came back asking for funds from reserves for things like that, I know I would be probably the first in line to support it, so. Thank you.
Appreciate that, trustee Kaiser, and I'll ask Superintendent Barnes to comment a little bit. I do know there are limitations on what our accumulated surplus can be used for. And I know there are some that are internally restricted versus.
There's always ways around that. We learned that from Ray Reiki. So.
Yeah. I'll ask Superintendent Barnes to comment. If anything that you'd like to add on this.
The good old days, Dave. I don't think
well, we can fund something else and take that money and that's what we used to do.
Shell game.
Yeah.
So the accumulated surplus, what's available in operating is just over 4, I think, and picking up on my words, my internally restricted, my externally restricted. So of course, that's where that good chunk of money is. It's set aside either by the ministry requirements or because past boards of trustees have decided that, that money has been set aside for that purpose, from which we drew the 940,000 for IT because we had that chunk in there. Happy to hear that if we were to come up operationally with some sort of plan that there would be support, but there is that caveat that we have to have ministry approval. And you might recall the last time we drew that chunk of funds for the athletic tech refresh, which when I read this is what I'm reminded of. So it's something that we've done in the past for sure. We made that request and we didn't actually get approval from the ministry until March or April. And then we were in this mad scramble to get, the purchasing done because we had to receive the goods by the end of August. So great to explore, great to come up with the ideas, bring it forward for approval. But there is that last level that we have to keep in the back of our mind that we do have to get ministry approval for these ideas.
Thank you.
Susan?
Just a couple of comments. I think these are, did you forget Leo? Sorry, Leo.
You gave me eye contact first.
Sorry. I think they're all great news stories. I think staff will be excited about these things. I think we need to promote all of these things. I'm looking forward to hearing more about them. I think the one-time funding, I have to agree with David. I think there are things that we really do need to look seriously at funding. I know busing is a big deal. I know it's a big issue. I don't know how we manage that piece, but that we need to probably talk more about. And I would really look forward to the exploration of other academic programs too that might be on the horizon that we could expand some opportunities for students and again encourage people to come and spend their time with us at our CDSB. So I think these are great. I'm happy to see them as other considerations and they don't need approval. We just want to know how it happens as it goes on, right? So thank you for that.
Thank you, Susan. Dave?
It's Leo.
Thanks. He called me a wrong name the other day.
Fair enough.
It's just neat to see these other 4 considerations. The only thing is that, with the other recommendations, the recommendations are passed and stuff like that. So with these, how are you going to communicate those to for the first one, the subject council? Because I know when we were at Fellows, it was brought up by a number of teachers and staff that they'd be really interested in this. So I'm assuming you have some plan for these 4 to get out to the people that they're targeted towards.
Absolutely. Through you, Vice Chair Bowen, the idea here is that the likelihood, I should say here, is that we come back in the June report with another set of recommendations. It might be the use of the one-time funding. It could be something else, but the idea is we would take that February to May long weekend to explore these and bring forward. So there may be additional recommendations in that June report beyond an update on where we're at, as well as the sort of the deliverables that were approved, the 5 other recommendations. There could also be ideas for further consideration or exploration. So that would be our approach. And then we'd be leaning on Meredith and her team in showcasing, documenting, preparing what programs at secondary look like at the RCDSB. One of the real benefits, and it was a little bit of a dry report, an 18-pager in December of 2018, when we put out to the system and to the public our elementary programming. I mean, it put in writing a 10 to 20 year plan for the district, which I have no question in my mind increased people's confidence level that we wouldn't pull the plug on an immersion program at Champlain Discovery in grade 5. That we were committing outward. And that I think has gained us a lot of buy-in from parents and guardians. This would be the same notion. We would come back in June with a report, finalizing these deliverables, for lack of a better word, and then promote outward. Here's what we're looking at, our sort of our roadmap for the future. And I know you can only do, maybe 5-10 years, but even that is a whole educational journey for a generation of students. So that would be the idea.
The other thing I want to add is that I don't think senior management would like to have another day like today because they're going to. From what you said, right, there's a lot of reports that we're expecting to have by the end of June. And just even the recommendations that we had passed, and then these 4 as well. So it's just a lot of extra workload for senior staff. Thank you, and wherever you delegate it down to, but thanks in advance for all of that.
Exactly.
Thank you, Leo. Any other questions or comments? Just wanted to throw my 2 cents in, and that is this last page with other considerations regarding Rethink secondary. I think this last page is a in writing gesture that we've listened. These 4 things that they're not sort of in stone yet, but they're on the front page. And I really think that, I've heard them, Leo heard them at Fellows. I couldn't make it at Fellows when I heard them at RCI. We heard them across the board. So it's good that you put those in there, put some sort of soft teeth in them, so to speak. And that's pretty well it. And I would like to, if there's no other questions or comments, I would like to ask that we're looking for.
I think we're just looking for a motion.
Yeah, motion to adjourn. We're looking for it, coming to me. And I need a seconder. I'll let Dave do this. Dave Dobson. Okay, all in favor? Thank you very much for your time and patience.
Good job. Good job, Mike.